East Hampton Town Trustees, you're live on the air and you're being recorded.
Thank you. I'd like to open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can you do a roll call, please?
Sure. John Aldred.
Here.
Francis Bob.
Here.
Rick Drew.
Here.
Ben Dollinger.
Here.
Tim Garneau.
Here.
Mike Markinson. Susan McGraw-Keeper. Here. Bill Taylor.
All right.
Bill's almost here. There he is.
And did I-
Oh, Bill's coming.
Bill is, okay.
Here. All right, let's go into public comment. Tonight we have a presentation on the Northwest Harbor research findings from Steve Warner and Rick Whalen. Who are we starting with? Rick or Steve?
I think to start with Steve and then I'll.
Okay, Steve, you're on.
All right, hello, everybody. I sent you guys a updated report on the research we've been doing and very carefully identifying and basically indexing all of the holdings, the allotments in that whole vicinity from Sag Harbor to Cedar Point down towards Hands Creek. So methodically going through particularly original allotments and framing it out almost like a jigsaw puzzle of what these allotments were, identifying the divisions chronologically and who received them, what the boundaries were, the size, and then framing that out and then bringing it forward as best as possible, but really identifying what was the original intent from 1653, the first one up in Northwest Harbor, or Northwest Meadows, which would be the salt marshes adjoining Northwest Creek on the east side, and right through 1747 major allotments that were given in a division. So Rick had done extensive research and work on that, those divisions in the 1730s, and I brought that up from 1653 through the early 1700s, 17 teens. There were numerous allotments that were part of I refer to them as loose divisions. They weren't uniform, like, lots 1 through 34 adjoining each other. They were sporadic, which is part of the confusion over the years of trying to identify these allotments, but pretty thorough. They go right to the town line at Sag Harbor and all the way east, joining what they call the Accabonock divisions. They met up, the Alewife Brook divisions, and everything I feel right now pertinent to this is in the report, identified. The boundaries that are critical are identified and noted. That the allotments that were salt marsh, referred to as meadows, they were right to the water bounds. So this would be Northwest Creek and so forth. The allotments that were near larger bodies of water, say fronting Northwest Harbor, Sag Harbor Bay, Gardner's Bay, none of these went right to the water. They're all bounded by the beach, whether they called it the cliff or the banks. They didn't use the word dunes, a back of dunes, as we would say, but all of them are identified as such. The work was difficult, the Sag Harbor area to a degree, but I feel that the pieces have come together in terms of the time period from 1653 through 1800.
Steve, can you explain why they call it the acabonic when it doesn't seem to be near acabonic? That boundary you talked about?
Which one?
Referred to as acabonic.
Right. So when they were laying out divisions and allotments within the divisions up there on the east side of Northwest Harbor, up there, they called it Alewife Brook Neck. Those allotments to the east are joined up with the acabonic allotments. So the two separate areas, separate divisions, but they did meet up at corners.
Steve, you referred to the allotments on the larger water bodies going to the cleft or the beach. Are there any key transactions that you can denote in this report or in other research information that you have that illustrates that?
Yeah, there's many of them. One of them jumps out to me is an allotment listed in there all the way to the town bounds, which at that time, towards Sag Harbor, were identified as a large pine tree near the beach. They actually called it the Clay Cliff. And that was recited by the surveyors in the town records earlier, dealing with Southampton in regard to the town boundaries. But they did give an allotment to a guy, and it's stated as there. So we know that that would be the northern portion of its allotment. So the rest of it's beach. And we know that we've discussed this before over in Sag Harbor and Northwest Landing, they did convey out what would ultimately be marsh, filled in marsh, beach, lands underwater for commercial purposes to, expand the town. But other than that, nobody was given private allotments of beach just for themselves.
There are some homeowners associations on Northwest Harbor that claim to have private beaches at this time. Are there transactions that conflict with the trustees' original intentions?
Yeah, I've been trying to determine every single allotment, getting original title for everything in our scope. But at the same time, while doing that, I've also been compiling many deeds and conveyances, much more recent times. So everything in between the time period allotments stopped being recorded in the town records, roughly 1800 probably. That's when they were recorded at the county. So I do look at those, and it's really, you could say David Russell was the first of the property owners that started to give the trustees and the people a hard time regarding access on the beaches. And I've studied the Russell allotments. They came down to the Payne family after, but those conveyances where David Russell ended up living, little Northwest Neck area towards Sag Harbor, those original allotments were bounded by the beach. So where he claims that, I have not found any conveyance that included the beach. So to answer your question, I've been trying to find more, 20th century records as well, deeds, to bring it forward. And there's gaps, not finding that. So I know that I could tell you that it didn't include the beach originally. At what point, where did all of a sudden it include the beach? That's a big question.
In today's complex world, how does one determine who owns those properties now if you have original definitions that are relied upon for other matters like Truck Beach. What the trustees did then, we're bearing the consequences of now. How do you have the flip side of that coin taking place, without there being proper documentation to support it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's tricky, right? We're dealing with almost 400 years of property history and regulation. But I feel that the record really is sound in regard to the town and the townsmen and then the trustees' regulations of these areas. And, as I wrote in the report, there are no divisions laid out for the beach. Beach is up there, nor were they included as what were called additions to properties. So if you had a property somewhere fronting the beach, they didn't later say, well, all right, we'll add that since you're right there. There's no examples of that anywhere. We don't see this until the late 19th century. Actually, I'm sorry, earlier than that, the Rogers family over east of there, they were making claims, and have a lot of that work done as well. It's not complete, but hopefully be able to tie that all in. But that's another example. We know about Kirk and his neighbor Johnson fencing people off on the beach. We know about the court's ruling saying, well, the erosion changed the boundaries. It's very skeptical about that ruling, but we're relying on the record, and I'm working tirelessly trying to be creative where I can't find things. I'm looking in old newspapers, variety of sources. I can't rely just on the deeds, unfortunately, but I wish that the town records and trustees had continued to record conveyances after 1800 or so. That would make our life easier, but being very thorough about this.
Steve, on what basis did somebody like, was it Rogers, you said, which is one of the first people that claimed the beach, on what basis did they claim the beach? Do you know? If there's no conveyance you can find that goes onto the beach.
I think what they did was, I know in Rogers' case, they consolidated properties up there. So they were buying Terry property, Vanscoy and the like, and Russell did this as well. So they were consolidating earlier conveyances into larger holdings. We're talking several hundred acres. And why would they do that? I don't know. We know about Kirk putting barbed wire on the beach to prevent them from traveling along it. Why do people do this? I don't know. But they feel they have will challenge litigation. As far as the trustees back then, my sense, spending so much time really literally reading everything word for word many times, just get a sense that by the mid 1800s, they just don't seem to be as active. I don't know if the Montauk situation may have affected them negatively that way, but it just seems that they were unsure of things that their ancestors earlier were so certain of. For example, firewood. Trees were one of the most precious commodities in the town, and the highways are not like what we think of today. They were very strict about letting people cut wood in the roads. So you think about that, you want to clear the roads for passage, and if it grows up, it's more difficult to travel. But you'd think that they just want anybody to go in there, but they were strict about people were reporting people trespassing. So they seemed to know every square inch of East Hampton, what was allotted, what wasn't, who was, doing what on the roads. But by the 1850s, it just seems less sure. And then they started to flex the muscle, putting out ordinances, defending people who will test, like against Kirk, test these things. But it really, we know the 1880s were really the worst for all this. But I'd say starting in the 1850s, you start to see this come up. And I think it was people with some money who were able to consolidate large holdings and, say they had the beach, like Frank Colton Havens over in Sag Harbor. I've compiled a number of deeds. He's purchased properties from a variety of people to consolidate for his estate. Now they all say down to the bay. Now over there, I make a case that because it's so close to the commercial activity and the trustees were indeed allotting land underwater out 200 or more feet, that, okay, maybe that particular place is, people at private title. We go back to Rysam and Slate and so forth. It's not easy.
Hey, Steve, changing gears for a second. Barcelona Neck, the state at some point acquired the state park as we now know it. We know there are acknowledged trustee roads through the park, and there are sections of beaches that are acknowledged as trustee beaches, but somewhat haphazardly, other sections of beaches seem to not be recognized as trustee beaches, particularly down by the inlet to Northwest Creek and in front of a private residence that seem to come out of that transaction and the dealings that took place. I know you've looked at the deeds pretty carefully. I think Rick's looked at them also. Is there language in the deeds or any delineations of the maps that would lead you or someone to have a different take on that?
I believe that that whole area there, Russell Neck, Barcelona Neck, that the beaches along there were always trustee beaches and still are today. And I don't think New York State DEC owns those. They own the land within it. There's a number of conveyances, and we have that. Back in the spring, we worked on that. I spoke with the DEC, and they agreed with me that we, the trustees, own the creeks within it. They did not challenge that. I didn't bring up the beaches because I wanted to keep, really, really thoroughly investigate that. But again, going back to the beginning, we're talking Stratton, we're talking Timothy Mulford family. These were the people that were Conkling that were given the land along there and never included the beach. So how did Russell claim it and then later Payne? I don't know what the DEC's feelings on that would be, but to me, we're working hard trying to piece this together. If somebody challenged that, say, okay, well then show us, produce something that shows a legitimate transfer. I don't see trustee transfers of these things. So where would it come from?
But wasn't there a transfer or some kind of an agreement between the trustees and the county at some point? I think that might have influenced some of what's designated down there as county owned. I don't know what those transfer documents understand exactly, but my understanding is that the boat, part of the underwater land was transferred to the county in exchange for dredging the inlet.
Oh, yeah, that's Suffolk County DPW, the Northwest Creek, that section that they did back in the 60s. But Rick's referring to further west there, Little Northwest Neck, the Russell Neck, Barcelona. And there are the DEC holdings that came from a realty company in the early 80s, I believe, that they acquired. But in my dialogue with them, just, studying it carefully, looking at the deed that transferred that to the DEC, that doesn't include those Little Northwest Creek and adjoining Rattlesnake.
Say that one more time while I.
Pardon me?
Allison.
Sorry about that. It's just a little technical issue, but everything's fine. Go ahead, Steve.
So, yeah, it'd be great if we can find everything pertinent and recorded and documentation for these issues. I do not have a trustee lens on doing this. Trying to just determine the facts, the truth. That's all. There could be something. Agreement is not always recorded well. The filed maps often aren't reflective of agreements. So, but I have not seen it. And to go back, it wasn't originally conveyed. So at what point, how they were conveyed, I have not seen.
Hey, Steve, to John's point earlier, you did do quite a bit of research on the county's deal with the trustees for, I think it was 75 acres of property, bottomland, Stratton's Beach. That was a legitimate transaction, if I'm not mistaken, and the county does have that eastern section there at this time. I don't know if it was the best deal the trustees ever made, but could you embellish on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we found pretty much everything for that, and it seemed to be correspondence going back into the 60s, town trustee's attorney or town attorney, as trustee records talking about the cost of the dredging there, and is decided to just allow the county to do it annually, I guess. And so they figure, I think it was Clifford Edwards, the attorney involved, and who, by the way, at that same time still had a salt marsh parcel down that way, probably descended from 1653 and his family. So they decided that it was worth giving that to them. I'm sure the county said, yeah, we'll do it, but we want title.
And then going along the east side, can we just cover briefly the east side of Northwest Harbor out towards Ellsworth Brook and then take it to the point?
Well, we know that the Ellsworth Brook neck section with the divisions later, the big ones in 1730s and 40s, that was what wasn't already allotted. They were dividing up and go up by Hedges Bank. Those northern divisions, allotments, they were bounded by the bank. They did not include the beach. And then running south along there, down towards Barnes Meadow, and you have conveyances involving Ellsworth Brook. Now, I write about that. There's a division, 5th division, 1686, that is giving people allotments throughout East Hampton. That's why I call them loose divisions. Like I said, they're not neat, uniform next to each other, all of them. They were kind of here and there. They could be in Napeague, they could be in Amagansett, it could be in Accabonac, could be in Wainscott. That was part of the work was identifying which ones were pertinent to us for the scope of the geographic scope of this. So early on, they were 1686 and giving allotments around Alewife Brook, Alewife Pond. One of them properties is bisected by Alewife Brook. Now, you could discuss the interpretation of that, saying, does the brook run with the land, or does it just happen to have the brook running through it? My personal interpretation reading it is the latter, that the brook happened to run through it. Some of the conveyances are bounded by Alewife Pond, but there's an example, and I put it in there. John Parsons and his brother, I believe, were given a conveyance. The brother's conveyance is bounded by Alewife Pond. Samuel's includes part of Alewife Pond. Now that's quite early. Then in the early 1700s, the proprietors and trustees decided that they wanted to use Alewife Brook Neck for goats and livestock. I guess at times if Montauk wasn't practical, and they herded them up there. So they actually did a number of exchanges with men for areas elsewhere, usually east, Accabonac, Amagansett, giving that back to the proprietors. It's not until those divisions later, 1730s and 40s, that they reallotted them. So you might have examples of original title. You think the 1730s or 40s allotment is the original title, the first owner, but it very well could have been allotted much earlier and then given back. So I have to keep working on the brook and the pond to see, what point. I know most of the conveyances are bounded by the pond or the brook. So, but you can't discount when you see an allotment that includes those. So I do know that the trustees regulated fishing in those. So that's, to me, that's kind of an indicator that trustees, retain title. Plus, if you interpret the Dongan patent to include those things, then yes. But it is possible at one time it was private property.
And what about the beaches out towards Cedar Point?
There's an example in there. I put it in where I think it was Matthias Burnett is granted the western end of Cedar Point Beach, and it says from sea to sea. That's 1712. Now that's around that time with the looser divisions that were given out. It's in between 1686 and the 1730 and 40 big divisions, this time period, 17 teens through early 20s. That's unusual. I don't know why he was given that. Maybe he had some kind of a commercial operation up there. Something to do with fishing or something. I don't know. But we do know that there was a road through it, and there was common land on it. So whether that includes the beaches, the description's not any better than what I said, sea to sea. But again, still trying to piece that section together completely.
Do you have anything to add, Rich?
Okay, Richard Whalen. So I'm going to try to give you a synopsis of the whole thing from Sag Harbor to Hedges Banks. I've talked extensively with Steve on this. We agree on most points. There are a couple of things I think that we don't necessarily agree on, but the basis of what I'm going to tell you is both the work that Steve has done and also research work that I've done over the years and, reviewing the town records and so forth. So let's start at Sag Harbor. One thing you have to understand today is that of all the places in the town of East Hampton, for the most part, the town of East Hampton today geographically probably looks very similar to what it looked like in the 1600s when the town was first settled. One place where that's not true is Sag Harbor. Sag Harbor was at one time largely a giant tidal marsh but it apparently had some other interesting features. There was a hill called Turkey Hill that was a north-south ridge that ran along the east side of Sag Harbor Main Street, and apparently ran right down to the bay near the foot of Long Wharf. And it's very clear. Steve referred to earlier reference to the clay cliff. There are references in the old records to a bluff as tall as 50 feet high on the bay at Sag Harbor. Now, I think 50 feet was probably somebody's exaggeration, but apparently there was a glacial ridge that came down to the bay, roughly where Long Wharf is. That was excavated over the years, and the fill primarily from that ridge was used to fill in Sag Harbor. That's why much of Sag Harbor is above sea level. So just east of that ridge were wetlands. Even into the late 1800s, there were still wetlands. For example, where the Sag Harbor American Legion is, that was wetland till roughly around the turn of the last century. So you have those physical features that give you a little bit of an idea, with some of the conveyances. But the very earliest conveyances in Sag Harbor were either not recorded or not well recorded. So we don't know in many cases whether the trustees conveyed to the bay or the water, or whether they conveyed to the beach or the cliff. And consistent with what Steve has told you, most of the time where you find conveyances on the outer lands of the town, I'm talking the harbors, the outer harbors, not inside Fremont Harbor or inside Accabonac, but on the outer bays in Northwest Harbor or Gardner's Bay, generally speaking, the conveyance does not run to the water. They usually stopped at the beach or what they would often call the cliff, which is the bluff or the bank. And that's generally true, but in some cases we don't have the original conveyances, so we can't prove that. So let's take the Sag Harbor area. The western part of that along Bay Street, we know that the trustees clearly granted right down to the water because they granted into the water. There are about a dozen or so water lot conveyances in the from the mid 1800s till around the beginning of the 20th century. And water lots meant they were conveying underwater land. Did they have the right to convey underwater land in Sag Harbor Bay? Who knows what they were doing? So we know that, west of, let's say, Conkling Point, which is, the Bay Street area where the marinas are, the trustees granted, some of that is filled land, but the trustees granted underwater rights and people filled it later on. As you move east, you get into the subdivision, you get into Havens Beach, and then you get into the 4 subdivisions, the so-called Sands subdivisions. You've got Azurest, Sag Harbor Hills, Sag Harbor Beach Club, and Nineveh Beach. These are the kind of well-known subdivisions that were done. They were developed in the 1940s, late 1940s and 1950s, largely for African Americans from the New York City area that were trying to find a place where they could go and be able to have a summer retreat of their own. And so those subdivisions, they pretty much all front on bluff. Steve was not able to find, well, first of all, the maps themselves, the 4 different subdivision maps, they all show ownership to the mean high water mark. Was that correct? We don't really know. Steve was not able to find, as far as I know, he was not able to find deeds prior to around 1947. So we don't have the deeds that lead into the modern ownership when those properties were developed. In 1730s, so let me back up for a second and just go over quickly the history of land allotments by the trustees. So first of all, when East Hampton was first settled, we know that the area around Town Street, as they called it, Lower Main Street, Town Pond, those were the very earliest allotments in the town. People got home lots on either side of Main Street, generally from about 9 to 13 acres apiece. And they usually also got at the same time allotments in the Eastern Plains, kind of east of Egypt Lane, if you will, and in the Great Plain, which would be the Appoquog area, the area to the west of Main Street. We don't have those original allotments. They were not recorded. What we have is from the 1670s to there were 2 different town recorders who from about 1670 to 1680 did inventories of what everybody owned at that point in time. And so you can get a sense in the 1670s of what everybody had been allotted to that point. There were all these small allotments that went on up until 1736, and Steve actually does itemize a number of those in his report. A lot of them were relatively small, half acre. They called them a half acre allotment and so forth. They included the wetlands at Accabonac and the wetlands at Northwest Meadows. Those were two of Salt Meadow at that time was a very valuable, that's something that you really needed for, bedding for your animals, forage, and so forth. So the meadows, Salt Meadows were very valuable property early on. We know those were very early conveyances. I think Steve even documents the Northwest Meadows were allotted as early as 1653. But all of those early conveyances, unfortunately, are not recorded in the town of the trustee records in any kind of systematic fashion. That changes in 1736. From 1736 to 1747, the trustees made a number of major allotments, over 13,000 acres of which are actually relatively well recorded. And in many cases, you can figure out with some accuracy where they are today. And those are particularly important for a lot of the Northwest area. So in 1736, there was one allotment in Sag Harbor that was bounded north by the beach, not by the bay or by the water. It was a 65-acre allotment that went to Daniel Miller. That was in. Let me tell you what the divisions were. So in 1736, this was the largest of them. In 1736, the trustees did the so-called 10-acre division. That covered about 7,000 acres of land. Accabonac Neck, northwest, central portions of the town, a major land allotment. Remember, too, all of these land allotments you're talking to, they exclude Montauk. They generally exclude Napeague. Napeague was worthless at that time. So you're talking about really part of the town west of Napeague to the town line. That's roughly 30,000 acres of land. So when I say that the conveyances, those land allotments from 1736 to 1748 actually encompass around 13 or 14,000 acres of land. That's about half of the land between the town line and the western end of Napeague. So this is where the trustees did their major allotting of property to private hands. In 1740, they had a 5-acre division and then a 4-acre division, same year. In 1747, they had a 3-acre division. And then the last formal division that the town trustees made was in 1748. That was the Pine Lots division. That they didn't record terribly well. The Pine Lots were both pine forest around Swamp Road, the so-called Pine Swamp area, and also on Napeague. This actually did include part of Napeague. The Pine Lots on Napeague, both in the center of Napeague, where you still see pitch pines today, as well as up in the area just west of Lazy Point. And, currently the promised land portion of the state park. And where the pine trees are today, those are where the Pine Lot divisions were. So in 1736 was the 10-acre division. I'll mention this a couple other times because that was the most important of these divisions. There was a division, there was an allotment made in Sag Harbor. It went to Daniel Miller of 65 acres and it was bounded north by the beach. That's the only one I have from the early allotments in the Sag Harbor area. And bounded north by the beach means it wasn't bounded by the bay. That's what it means to me. So, but I can't tell you exactly where that is. I mean, it's presumably west of the Sands subdivisions. How do I figure that out? Because the subdivisions, Azureth and Nineveh Beach, they're all bounded north by bluff. Okay, and if you had a bluff, they would say the cliff, generally the bank or the cliff. So this would suggest it was west of there, maybe at the Havens Beach area, maybe where Cor Maria is today, but we don't know very precisely. Moving east, Little Northwest Creek. So Little Northwest Creek, the most recent conveyances at Little Northwest Creek were in 1979. The state bought both sides of Little Northwest Creek, well, at least both sides of Little Northwest Creek, from Reuben Realty Corp. This is before Barcelona came in for subdivision, before Barcelona was preserved. Those deeds don't give the trustees any ownership of Little Northwest Creek. They just include the creek. I happen to think that's incorrect. And we do have a filed map from, I think it's 1911. In 1911, there was a map filed with the county clerk. It's a recorded map. It's not a subdivision map, but you could just record a survey of your property in those days. Still could do it today. It's map number 105. It was filed on July 22nd, 1911, and it showed the property at Russell's Neck of the William Hunting estate and a gentleman named J. Clarence Hand. It includes basically all of Barcelona Neck, including Meadowland on the east side and on the west side. For our purposes, what's interesting is where the Meadowland on the west side abutted Little Northwest Creek, it ran to and shown on the map as abutting the edge of the creek. And they even have what looks like meets and bounds, except it's not that easy to read, but they ran along the edge of the creek. So it would appear that conveyances, at least as late as the early 1900s, were not to the center line of the creek. They were to the boundary of the creek itself, Little Northwest Creek. So I think now this is something Steve was also trying to find some deeds on. I know he wasn't able to do it. I suspect if you were able to go back in time to the late 1800s or the early 1900s, you'll probably find that the conveyances in that area would go to the creek, not to the center line of the creek. So my assumption, and we have that map at least to base it on, is that the bottom of Little Northwest Creek should still be owned by the trustees. Barcelona Neck is one of those ones that the actual original conveyances are pretty darn clear. And that's what was used there was actually litigation, as you probably know, between the trustees and Ben Heller in the late 1980s over exactly where his property ended. Barcelona Neck was allotted in part of the 10-acre division in 1736 in two big parcels. And these, at that time, the acreage of the parcels in the 10-acre divisions, they were 130 acres, 150, 160 acre parcels. They didn't always go to one person. Sometimes they were split among different grantees, but they were allotting chunks of land. So in the 10-acre division of 1736, Barcelona Neck was lots 34 and 35. And because of the nature of the neck and the fact that it's so, the shape of it, it's very easy to tell you where you are. By the way, I should point out, they didn't call it Barcelona Neck at the time. It was called Little Northwest or Little Northwest Neck. The northern lot, which was lot 34, was bounded northwardly by the cliff. The trustees have never made a grant since that time that went beyond that. On the east and the west sides, it was bounded by the east side road and the west side road. Those were the things that were in litigation. Those were disputed with Ben Heller back in the 1980s, because over time, and this is sort of what Steve was referring to, how did people sometimes get to own to the bay or to the water where maybe the original grant didn't go for? Creepy. They got a deed in 1783 that went to the beach, and when they conveyed it 40 years later, they conveyed it to the bay or to the harbor. No one's checking. No one says you can't do that. But remember, it's a principle of real property law. You can't have more than your predecessor had, right? So if your predecessor wasn't granted it, you weren't given it. So in Barcelona, at least to the west side road, the east side road, where are they? Well, the east side road, the west side road today. You know where they are. I mean, actually, I won't get into the details of this. The east side road, they kind of screwed up. The modern tax map is wrong. The trustees got a little bit of the road that wasn't the original road. But by and large, the east side road and the west side road exist today. And where they terminate, the west side road ends in a place called Pond Landing, just before you go into the woods. And there is a pond, there's kind of, there's the marshy area on the left that terminates in the pond. There's a little landing down in the bay, and there's a tap off that road that continues kind of on into the woods. That's the end. That's really the end of the West End Road. So the original conveyances said that they were bounded north by the cliff and west and east by highways. And then in the early 1800s, when David Russell owned the property, there was a dispute between he and the various Meadow landowners about where the roads were. So they kind of rejigger things and they discuss it all over again. So that's, the town records are unusually clear regarding the existence and the location of those roads. And that's one of the reasons that Ben Heller, wound up having to, the state condemned the property, but it was giving Heller a lot of trouble. Let's just put it that way. So I think the beach at the northern end of Barcelona, I think the trustees own the beach because the original grant is very clear. It only went to the cliff. Rick was asking about that lot, by the way. The individual house lot, that was not created as part of the Barcelona Neck deal. That existed from about I think at least the 1960s. There may have been a house there. And I would say that the beach in front of that lot is not privately owned. That should be owned by the trustees.
The reason why the eastern road wouldn't go all the way to the beach?
Well, it went to the western end of what was called Stratton's Beach, still called Stratton's Beach, really. and in fact, the next thing I was going to refer to is in 1961 or 62, I forget the exact year. In 61 or 62, the trustees went to Suffolk County and asked the county to dredge the inlets of Little Northwest Creek. And when they did that, they moved the inlet. The inlet used to be closer to the end of Northwest Landing Road, and they moved the inlet to the western side of Stratton's Beach, joining it to land to the east and separated from Barcelona Neck. So, we don't know. All we know is that the original allotment went to the original grant at Barcelona Neck. The original allotment in 1736 was bounded on the east and west side by roads, by highways. Where did the eastern highway terminate? It's not clear. I would presume it terminated at the beach, but the trustees probably granted, I think, Samuel Stratton. I mean, I think he was the one first associated with Stratton's Beach. I don't remember if he was the first grantee, but it's pretty clear that Stratton's Beach was privately allotted at some point in time. Now, in the early 60s, or 61 or 62, as Steve mentioned, it's very clear the trustees knowingly granted the underwater land at the very northern end of the creek, primarily the land north of the bulkhead, where the kind of boat basin is. I think it's about 25, 26 acres of land. They did a deed to Suffolk County in exchange for the dredging. That's one thing that is clear. Moving past the rest of Northwest Creek is obviously owned by the trustees.
If the ownership was to the roads on the east and west of Barcelona, who owned beyond the roads?
Those were meadow lots. So what happened is the very early conveyances, let's say it's the east side of Barcelona, because it's more clear. If you follow the east side road today, the actual east side road, not necessarily where the tax map shows it, even today, is very close to the edge of the woods. Within 30 yards, if you go right east, you break out of the wood line and you're at Saltmarsh, right? So the purpose of the road is very clear, that the very early allotments before 1736, before the trustees granted the woodland at Barcelona Neck, allotted it, they had already allotted the meadow lots on either side of the creek. And so all the salt meadow on the west side of Northwest Creek, the main creek, to the wood line, that was all allotted. And what was the purpose of that highway? It was to run right close to the edge of the woods so that all the people who own their meadow lots could get to them. And I think Steve has a map. I think it's in here, right? Is your map in here, Steve, with the allotments on? I guess he showed it to me separately, but he's got a map showing the allotments along one side, the east side of Northwest Creek. There's like 36 different lots. So there were many individual small lot owners of the meadowlands, and that's how they got to their property. Moving north now from Northwest Creek, the next area to the north, the Barnes Meadow area, because I know this was something that was asked about at the very beginning. So you have the end of your Northwest Landing, which originally was really close to where the inlet was, and now the inlet's been moved west. From the Barnes Meadow area is really between Northwest Landing Road and Mile Hill Road. It's not clear who owns the beach there. It's probably not that important anymore because, except for the former High Barbary Marina property, which is now basically derelict, but is still privately owned, the other land is owned by the county, by the state, or by the town. So no one's interfering with beach access. But I can't tell you whether the trustee, who owns, where that land, those conveyances. We don't have a clear lineage of the allotments.
What about the creek?
I'm pretty sure that creek would have gone with the meadow. Barnes Meadow was a very, very early allotment. In fact, it's referred to in the 1736 10-acre allotments of the Grace Estate, the southern boundary of that range of lots that comes down along the east side of Northwest Harbor is bounded by Barnes Meadow. And the creek itself is, it's narrower than Little Northwest Creek. So there's no evidence that the trustees excluded that whenever they granted the meadow. So I think it clearly went with the meadow. And the meadow today, that meadow is now mainly owned by the DEC. When you go north of Mile Hill Road, so from Mile Hill Road to L.Y. Brook Road, this is the Grace Estate area, right? We have the Grace Estate Preserve, has some shore frontage. There were also 3 subdivisions there. We have the settlement in Northwest, the former Camp St. Regis property on the north side of Mile Hill Road. And the northern end of the Grace Estate Preserve, you have the Grace Estate subdivision, and then right hard up against L.Y. Brook Road, you have the Lighthouse Landing subdivision. It goes back to 1978. The Lighthouse Landing subdivision map and the Settlement Northwest map, both of them show ownership to mean high water. I think that's wrong. Why do we think that's wrong? Go back to the 1736 10-acre land division. This is one of those areas where it's pretty clear where they are. You know, the 1736 land subdivisions they allotted a range of lots from Cedar Point east, that's Hedges Banks, and I'll come to that. And then they allotted a range of lots along the shore of Northwest Harbor running south from roughly the mouth of L.Y. Brook down to Barnes Meadow. And these are names that still exist today, so we know where they are. As we famously know from the Kirk case, the range of lots coming south from L.Y. Brook was bounded on the west side by the cliff. It didn't include the beach. Now, Hosea Kirk still won a lawsuit against the trustees in which he claimed, and ultimately the Court of Appeals held that he did own the beachfront in front of his property. He basically claimed two different things. He claimed that he had excluded the public and acquired it by adverse possession. He also claimed that it was really a fixed boundary in the beginning, and that over time erosion had caused the beach, if the trustees had retained the beach, that it had moved out into Northwest Harbor. It's ridiculous, okay? It was an ambulatory boundary. There's no other reason they would have bounded the land by the beach if the trustees didn't want to hold on to the beach in perpetuity for travel purposes.
Does that relate to the MACLO?
Yes.
So does the MACLO ruling supersede the Kirk?
I would argue that it does. So you had a fight with, it wasn't Harry McLeod, it was his brother, in the West End Road area a few years ago. He had property that was bounded by the beach grass line. The trustees claimed that his property was further north. Bottom line is, the court determined in McLeod that the beach grass line was an ambulatory boundary. It was intended to migrate, meaning that the trustees owned the beach and everything north of the beach he owned. And I think the same principle applies today. Steve and I have had some interesting discussions about the Kirk case and how it came down the way it did. I will say this: I think in the late 1800s, American courts were very, very, very pro private property owner, even when the adverse interest was what the public. And I just think, honestly, that it was if you read the case, not only is the decision, and what's the Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York State, not only is the decision hard to read and follow, but it's completely illogical. All right. So, all right, he won the case. Today, we own the part of the property he owned, which was the Grace Estate. We know he didn't own the settlement to the northwest because that was Van Scoy land. That was Isaac Van Scoy Jr. and eventually went to Phoebe Van Scoy. So it didn't include that property. So that property is bounded by the same boundary that we're going back to 1736 is bounded west by the cliff or the bank. So I think that and to the north, again, we don't know precisely what the limits of Kirk's land were. He had a large tract of land. I'm going to say that on the shoreline area, it probably approximated the Grace Estate shorefront, both what's now the preserve and now the subdivision. The subdivision map, as you would expect, by the 1986, the town was and the trustees were on top of things, and so the subdivision map of the Grace Estate does not run to the mean high water line. The beach was kept out of it. So my conclusion, and again, this is still going back to the 10-acre division in 1736, is that regardless of the Kirk ruling, which is essentially moot today because of who owns his property, the trustees should still own the beach from Mile Hill Road to L.Y. Brook Road. This is largely true now as you go into the Cedar Point area. As Steve said, Cedar Point Beach itself was conveyed into private ownership to, I think you said it was Matthias Burnett. And we know that the trustees conveyed the western tip of it, which was then an island. Cedar Island was sold to the federal government in 1838 for the construction of the Cedar Point Lighthouse. But the beaches themselves, the conveyances in 1736, this was I think it was lots 12 through 19 of the 1736 10-acre division. Those ran from sort of the apex. It seems like lot 12 was bounded both by Northwest Harbor and by some of Gardner's Bay. By the way, we're talking 130-acre lots. These are big parcels of land. And then the range continued to the east, so that lot 19 is probably taking pretty much almost to Sandy Beach. All along there, the northern boundary is the cliff. That's Hedges Banks. So whether you're in Cedar Point County Park or whether you're along Hedges Banks Drive, I would say that the trustees should own arguably from the cliff, from the cliff edge down.
How do some of the surveys that I've looked at when we've been doing staircase claim go to the beach, go to the water?
Because they crept, the deeds crept, okay? In the 1800s or maybe the early 1900s, if somebody had bought property that was originally bounded by the cliff and now they sell it and they just bounded by the water. They just are now bounded by Gardner's Bay. And I'm not even sure it was necessarily a conscious way to like steal the public's land. In some people's minds, they were the same. No one was building on the beach. What's the harm? It became more of an issue in modern times when people began to then control access to the beach, claiming that they own the beach. So the last thing I just want to mention is L.Y. Brook Pond, as Steve did refer to. There is in the I think it was the 14th lot, in lot 14, which was granted to Seth Parsons and John Parsons, and I assume as Steve does that they were brothers, but I'm not sure. The conveyance is very clear. They were given part of the pond. So I don't know how much of Allbrook Pond was part of that conveyance. We don't have that level of specificity, but it's pretty clear that the trustees did knowingly grant part of the bottom land of L.Y. Brook Pond in 1736.
What about the brook that leads into the pond?
As Steve said, there's also conveyances before you get to lot 14 and lot 12. Lot 12 might have straddled the brook. That was the one nearest to Northwest Harbor. And I think lot 13, it's bounded on the south by the brook and by the highway. And it's not completely clear whether the highway they're referring to was on the north or the south side of L.Y. Brook. Today the county would claim to own it. If you look at their, at their tax map, whoever they got it from, was earlier in the 20th century, was used as a game preserve and went through, a number of people owned it. At one time, the husband of one of the Beals from Ray Gardens was the owner of, Cedar Point Park. So same kind of thing. I mean, they may have simply crept to include the brook itself. The good news, I suppose, is that it's owned by a public body. It's the county. But if you were to try to argue about it, you'd really have to go back and try to find earlier deeds and see if you can find at some point deeds that are bounded by the brook or by the pond.
So the allotments don't fill that requirement.
Well, the allotments, the allotment in 1736, the trustees distinctly say this includes part of the pond. So they were giving ownership of part of the bottom land in L.Y. Brook to a private owner. The issue is we don't know, exactly where that was.
Right. But did the other allotments specify not including?
One or two of the other allotments says bounded by the pond. It looks like lots 12 through 14 ran from at least where the mouth of the brook is to probably the larger part of the pond, right? And because remember, again, they're 130-acre lots, that's 390 acres between the L.Y. Brook Pond and Hedges Banks. So in some of these, you could still go back and try to refine things. There are two ways to attack the issue, try to find an ownership today. You could try to come forward from the original land allotments, almost impossible to do in most cases. Barcelona Neck is a rare exception because of the geography of the neck. Or you can try to go backward in time and try to chase backwards and find out if somebody had a deed in 1920 that went to the bay, and you keep tracking it back, and if you're able to track it back far enough, will it suddenly stop at the beach or at the bank? Sometimes you can't find those deeds. When I was counsel, to this board, we had an issue. You might remember at Driftwood Lane in the fireplace area. They were, someone, a lot owner, was claiming to own the beach. And we did a title report, and both the file map showed ownership to Gardner's Bay, to the mean high water line, and We had a title company trace it back. They got back to the 1880s or 1890s, and all the conveyances were to the bay, to the water. In the 1880s, they couldn't go back any further. Whether it was a result of an inheritance or something like that, they couldn't trace it back any further. So sometimes you just hit a dead end. But in some cases, you would be able to go back, and it obviously strengthens your argument if you can go back in time and find a deed that just goes to the bay, to the cliff, or to the beach, and not to the water. And sometime after that, they crept. The deed crept and went to the water without justification. So hopefully that summarized things a bit for you.
The question is, how do we deal with this?
I have notes that I could probably put into a format that you could save someplace. It gives you a basis in some areas for claiming, you want to argue that you own the beach along Northwest Harbor. This is the basis for it. If you want to claim that you own the bottom of Middle Northwest Creek, although it'd be nice to have a few more deeds, you have a basis for that. The bottom line is, in some cases, it's clear or much clearer as to whether you have ownership. We haven't disproved trustee ownership in many cases. We did in the case of the bottom land in Northwest Creek. We had a 1961 or 62 deed to Suffolk County. That's clear. In other cases, the ownership of the beach is still indistinct. The only thing I could suggest you would do for that would be, you could try to do further title research and try to go back in deeds. I know Steve was not able to do a lot of that because the whole COVID situation over the last year and lack of access to the county clerk's office. But that's probably the only way now that you would get a better idea of ownership of some of the beach where we're not certain.
Francis and Rick, I'll have a couple of points here as well. I was kind of formulating the same opinion as you, Francis, throughout this presentation, which is, what is the practical application of this tremendous body of work that you guys have done, and sort of living, if you will, work product that you have. And I'm struggling with that as well, Francis. And it seems to me that what we're doing here is really forming the basis for the two of you as expert witnesses and in form of an expert testimony. And the way I really see it coming to fruition down the road, unfortunately, is in the form of litigation if it were to go that route. And I think that's what we're really looking at here, is some expert witnesses if we do need to defend our ownership in the form of where it's significant the property owner with a beachfront. But I think that's what we're starting to look at is our couple of experts here if it went that route. Otherwise, what do you think? I mean, how do you see this thing?
Well, here's what I think. First, I don't think in the area that we just looked at, there aren't that many areas where it's likely to come to fruition. The Sands area, for example, if there's a dispute someday as to whether or not the beach at the foot of the bluffs there in front of Azureth and Nineveh is public or private, right now we don't have definitive proof of trustee ownership. Maybe if you went back before 1947, you could do that. That's an area where you could have a dispute with the private owners. Right now, you're not in a good position. In front of, let's say, Settlement in Northwest or the Lighthouse Landing subdivision, which, by the way, right now, nobody interferes with you if you go down that beach. Okay, the Grace Estate Beach on Northwest Harbor. There's no one interfering with you. If somebody wanted to, I think there's a good argument, again, based on the 1736 allotments, that the beach belongs to the public. They can't claim the benefits of the Kirk's case unless they can prove that Kirk owned some of their land, which I don't think the evidence is there for that. And the other area where you might have a dispute might be at Hedges Banks. Someday if somebody wants to put a rock revetment or something at the foot of those bluffs, do you have ownership? I think you do. But I guess the good news is that in many of the other areas, it's public parkland. So, whether you own it or the county owns it, it's probably not going to come to a head. But those areas I just identified, those are the main areas where you have a private landowner, maybe like the house at the end of Barcelona Neck, for example. If they wanted to put a revetment in front of their property, again, I think that's trustee land because of the original allotment. But there won't be that many points of conflict. If there are, then this is the starting point for how you would defend your ownership.
Let me bring up two relevant points that may require further attention. One is we're seeing a lot of use of all public spaces. We're seeing a lot of abuse of public spaces. We're trying to manage beaches responsibly, and Barcelona Neck is becoming a problem. And our local law enforcement is hesitant to really put any teeth into enforcement of activities in that area of the eastern Barcelona Neck beaches, because there's this artificial delineation of, well, this is trustee and this isn't. And the road stops before the parking lot and we can't do signage or this, that, and the other thing. So it's connecting these dots in areas like this that perhaps warrant further study, further research, so that these areas are clarified. Or what do we do with dredge spoil from Little Northwest Creek? It looks like we're going to be getting a permit in the near future. If we're going to put that on a beach, is it spoil that's paid for? Is it spoil that's put out for the public?
Right, right.
So there are questions simmering on the back burner. So there are a couple of areas, Chris, and maybe you can help be an interface to this dialogue that we may want to continue further research to dot the i's and cross the t's.
Well, it's much more limited now. I mean, I would suggest, for example, in the Sands area, as you estimated, the beach area, at least you know that you could, I'm sure there are recorded deeds before the 1747 subdivision. We know there are. I mean, this isn't ancient history. So you could go back and see, you could try to trace those back and see if you find deeds that end at the bluff, or at least at the beach.
From current time going back.
That's right. Trace them back.
Where might those be physically?
What's that?
Where might those deeds be?
Well, county clerk's office. I think it should be the county clerk's office.
Is COVID likely to continue?
My understanding, and I just heard this today, is that at least as of today, the Suffolk County Clerk's office is back open to the public.
Oh.
Just heard that today.
Steve, have you been up there at
Stay
all?
open.
No.
Apparently they reopened. If not today, then it must have been this week.
You know, it would be nice to clarify a couple of these key areas if we could. I don't know if you still got it in you or not, but I know you've exhausted a lot of time on this one. But
That was terrific,
thank you, Steve.
both of you.
Hard work.
A lot of
So
information,
much more information.
but thank you. Very interesting.
All right, well, we'll follow up with you guys. I think we need to reflect on all this and digest it a little bit. Forget it. But
That was read the other day.
there are some key points I think we do want to follow up on at some point.
It might be worth the time and money. Clarify this is, if we come this far, we
But, I'd focus on the areas that you might have to know.
right.
You probably don't need to know whether you own the beach at Cedar Point County Park, right? I mean,
But maybe in front of this 1.84 piece of, the piece of land that's for sale right now in Barcelona Neck. Yeah, asking price is $8.6 million. So that might be a good piece of property.
And then,
The town may also be interested in purchasing it.
and then you also have from the western road at Barcelona next to the mouth of Little Northwest Creek, there is a section of beach there.
yeah, and that's one we don't know the area, we don't know that. That would have been the westerly, those were outer meadowland allotments on the west side of the creek, and they're not well recorded in the records,
No man's land.
pretty much.
As long as you're here, Steve, could you address the question I had for you last week when we spoke on the phone? Because I found it to be very curious about the Peconic River
Oh, yeah.
issue. And I just would love you to reiterate what you said to me about it, because I had gone over in that area with John and took some beautiful pictures and posted it, social media, and it said, two maps I looked at, it said Peconic River, which I thought, weird. Peconic River is in Riverhead. But if you could just explain that.
Yeah, it's a curious thing. I remember seeing that, and I see it time to time. And I think 5 years ago or so, I think I found the origin of that was pretty certain back to a map, 1600s, probably produced in England, the golden age of cartography, where they just continued. That's what they called it. They didn't call it Gardner's Bay. We know where Peconic River is, but I think that I mean, this is just a guess, that whoever transferred that information, either not from around here, or has a love of geographic history and just decided to include that. But I've seen that way back, including that all the way to Peconic and Gardner's Bay. So this is the only thing I could say, is that somebody else saw that. This is reminds me of the Gardner's Bay, Nappy Bay place name case, where it turns out a draftsman, U.S. GS, I think in 1956, just for the sake of symmetry on a map, moved the Nappy Bay over further west towards Bell State, and it just continued from there. So that's why I've always said you don't trust maps. But I think that that's the same thing, except they went back way, way earlier and just, maybe felt, hey, it should be called what it was originally called, even though we know it wasn't called that.
Thank you.
I just like to say, I think Rick did an amazing job, and his work prior to our commencing this was a big help. Our numerous phone calls and email exchanges during this whole time has resulted in all of this. And as he said, we don't agree on to maybe some academic or legal points about the proprietors and the commonage, but I'm a pleasure to work with him and you guys on this. And I've learned a lot. I know he knows that area, every square inch of it, from his trail work and his professional work. And I truly believe that at this point, we have so much information. I mean, what I've given you today is just tried to make it manageable. I mean, we have so much information to bridge this forward if it was important. And I agree with what you guys said about maybe identifying key places. I know Little Northwest Neck mentioned Hedges Bank, but I absolutely believe that you have the foundation to trace any property in this whole scope, which is about 5 miles, back to original title, where you can determine what it was, what was the classification of land, who owned it, how big was it, and more importantly, perhaps, what were the original boundaries. And then backward and forward to 2021, somebody claims property larger than you think, be able to trace that. So that's been the goal all along.
Steve, is there a map that you've prepared that goes along with the report? Is that forthcoming?
Yeah, I have, Rick mentioned my reconstructed map of the Northwest Meadows Division. So what I'm doing, and I'll give them all to you, is I have mapping of the various divisions that are germane to this, where these allotments are, and then key individual allotments or individuals where their individual allotments are. So it's more of a large scale map of each one of those to determine those boundaries, to figure out, because some of these descriptions, as we all know, are somewhat vague, but now after so much of this work, we know where these parcels were, even if not precisely, very accurately. So it's a matter of deduction and plotting forward and determining. So yeah, you'll have all that as well.
And what about all the deeds you compiled? We get copies
Yep.
of all sent to the office?
Yep.
I just remember when I first started plotting all this stuff out, which I did many years ago, is when I first started going through the town allotments. I did do some hand-drawn maps. They're very, very rough, and they're like pencil drawn. But I'll provide them with you, because they do help a little bit to understand what these different ranges are. Pictures do help. So I'll pass it on to you.
Just in closing, Susan, you want to ask a question?
Just a quick one. It says phase 1. Is there a phase 2?
We've got so much work to do.
I know, I'm
There's
just,
a lot of work to do.
Well, I know, but
This board.
I was excited when I see phase 1. It's a lot of work.
On that note, how does the board feel about approving, paying these guys for the work they've done to date? And then maybe having another discussion to see if we want to hone in on a few points. Is that fair? Then make a motion to approve the final payments.
I'll second. Everybody seconds. Thank you.
And Steve, whatever else you can send along under phase 1, we'd appreciate whatever you got for us.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay.
Okay, number 2 on the list here is, well,
See me again?
His twin brother.
Changing gears here. As indicated in correspondence with you, so I represent Cynthia Crane, who owns property at 864 Springs Fireplace Road. She bought the property in 2020. And before we bought the property, we represented her in the purchase. And beforehand, because the property had a dock, we did a little bit of research and looked to see if there was a trustee permit for a dock. So it's only the second time I think I've ever been involved in the property within the existing dock. The other time I was on the seller side, and we were required on behalf of part of the deal to show that there was a dock permit for the dock, and we went and found a dock permit. We showed the buyer his dock permit. No, that was it. So we didn't do like a FOIL request. We just went and saw, was there a dock permit? There's an existing dock. Is there trustees have a permit? Yes, have they collecting the permit fees? Yes, they have. And that was the end of it. Well, it turned out that the dock that was there and had been for the previous 20 years or so was an 8 by 10 foot floating dock with a catwalk. After Cynthia bought the property, she submitted the form to renew the permit the annual permit in her name, and the trustees wrote back and said, well, actually, we looked back and the dock that you're asking for the annual renewal on is not the same size as what was originally approved in 1984. So we then asked for more materials from the trustees, and turns out the original dock that was approved was a 4 foot by 10 foot float. So we acknowledge that's what was approved. There's no question about that. What we would like to do is what we're proposing. We had asked to retain the existing 8 foot by 10 foot float. I don't think you're inclined to do that. And again, the original dock was 4 foot by 10 foot. What we would like to do is be able to have a 40 square foot float, not necessarily 4 by 10, because right now what would happen is the ramp that goes from her catwalk is on rollers, and if it's only a 4 foot wide dock, if the tide changes enough, it can either fall off or go over the other side, and that doesn't work. So she's going to have to build a new float anyway. The existing float is too large. In fact, you can't just cut it. She'd have to buy a new float. So I would ask for 2 things. One, can we have a 40 square foot float matching what was originally approved in 1984? And the other thing is we would like to keep the catwalk. The catwalk is preventing damage at the very end of the marsh. I should point out that the reason what Cynthia uses the float for is for a dinghy. She walks out on the catwalk to the floating dock and gets into the dinghy. She has a mooring that you've granted her with a sailboat, and she takes the dinghy to the sailboat. If she didn't have the floating dock, then she'd have to clamber down. Moor the dinghy there too, or drag the dinghy down the base of down the edge of the marsh. It wouldn't really be a very good situation. So the permit that the trustees issued to the prior owners goes back to 1984. That permit was paid for 36 years prior to. There were only 2 prior owners before Cynthia bought the property. So what I'd like to do is I obviously would like to be able to retain the catwalk. If you want us to change elements of it, make it see-through or something, we're happy to do that. And we would like to retain a float of the original size permitted in terms of square footage. That would be 40 square feet.
Right. Go ahead.
How do you address the issue that she doesn't own the land on which the catwalk ends up?
I think the trustees own it because based on the survey, the catwalk ends below the mean high water line. And I think we have surveys from 2 different surveyors showing the catwalk, showing the mean high water line in the catwalk, although it's on marshy ground, it is seaward of the mean high water line. So as far as I'm concerned, it's in your jurisdiction.
Rick, I personally think that, a 40 square foot float is reasonable to ask. But what we're ignoring is the improvements that were done without a permit. Where are we with that?
The improvements were done to the catwalk. There's been a lot of that.
No. The pilings are not the same. They're much larger. They're different.
Francis, if I'm not mistaken, I think the pilings for the float are the same pilings. They're just narrow pilings.
The catwalk, they're not.
Right, the catwalk, that's right. The catwalk are new. She put in new, I guess 4x4 tropical hardwood pilings. We understand. So I think I put this in my letter, but we're willing to go back to the original. They were steel, what do you call it? Almost like pipes. So we would go back to the original narrow pipes to support the catwalk.
Okay, well, that didn't come up in my.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. But no, as I said, we're willing to make, whether it's slatting the catwalk or replacing the pipes, replacing the posts with narrower pipes, because it's got to be removed annually. So I understand you want to minimize damage to the bottom line. We would agree to that. No, that's not a problem.
Hey, Rick, have you guys thought about a different approach? We're facing a lot of pressure on the waters, and there are some modular docking solutions that can be adhered with a couple of anchors and provide the equivalent of a walkway that is very easily removed without having to drive stakes into the bottom, whether they're metal, whether they're wood, whatever. And, in looking back at this, I think the float idea is creative and makes a lot of sense. But my own research, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, there's never been an application for the walkway. And there's no record of the walkway being ever permitted or paid for.
Well, so let me address that.
So I'm still confused here because the floating dock I've got no problem with. It's clear, it's been paid for, it's been permitted, but there doesn't seem to be a trustee permit for pilings or the walkway that anyone has shown.
All right, so we'll call that the catwalk, right? The catwalk that has that's on fixed pilings.
Fixed piling
catwalk. Yeah. So the original trustee records are, let's say, weak. All right. There was a sketch in there by Al Stewart, who was the owner of the land at the time. Very, very rough hand-drawn sketch, even rougher than what I'll give you on what we just talked about. And it appears to be T-shaped. All right. There is also a contemporaneous memo from Larry Penny, who originally, I think Stewart had proposed a larger float, and Larry said, you should have built something smaller. So they brought it down to the 4x10 foot float. But Larry wrote a memo to the board recommending there be a catwalk for exactly the reasons that Cindy is concerned about today, which is you're going to damage the edge of the marsh if you continue to perambulate over it. So whether the trustees approve the catwalk is not clear. They don't clearly state that they did. I admit that. But they don't clearly state, but we're all approving this, but we're not approving that.
But they did. We both read that together. It clearly states that they were approving the float.
And they don't mention the catwalk.
Exactly.
I acknowledge that. But what my point is that doesn't mean they didn't approve it. Here's what I'll say to what Rick is saying. Cindy's only concern is that she can get to the float without having to slide down the edge of the marsh. If there's a way to do that won't damage the marsh and she can get dry shot onto the float, I'm sure she'd be open to it.
Explain how you think the trustees own the marsh.
Yeah, do you have the survey?
No.
The mean high water.
The mean high water mark, the mean high water marks in some places does include the edge of your tidal marsh.
It goes well up into the short grass.
Yeah, and all trustee grants in the inner harbors were always to the water, which is always understood to be to the mean high water line.
One of those.
Yeah.
You always claim to own to the mean high water line in the harbors.
Claims it now, either the town claims it or the
So,
Nature Conservancy?
The property that Cynthia owns is a lot in a subdivision filed by a lady named Cynthia Faye Wilder in about 1984
On the other side.
or 83, sorry.
She's on the bay side now. Or-
Well, from Fireplace Road to Acrobatic, the property in question that was 1978. It was a 1978 subdivision from Cynthia Faye Wilder that created at least 4 lots and a reserved area. The reserved area is along the edge of the marsh. All right. I don't think that Cynthia Faye Wilder probably expected that if she was creating a reserved area that would block her waterfront lot owners off from getting access to the creek. And in fact, all these years, the landowner, the prior owner of Cynthia's lot, was using it for access. I mean, when the trustees approved this in 1984, the subdivision already existed. It was very obvious that she'd have to walk, whoever the lot owner of the dock, originally Al Stewart, was going to have to walk across the town reserved area to get to the creek. I mean, even if you didn't approve a dock, the town going to stop her from taking a kayak and dragging a kayak across the property? No.
No, but attaching a dock to it, yes.
You're right, exactly. So the question is, if you look at the original subdivision map, where the map was, I suppose the dock probably would go on to where the original reserved area was. But if you do a modern survey, and there are 2 different surveyors, Saskis and someone else that Cynthia hired, I think from the North Fork, they both show the mean high water line landward of the edge of the dock. The other thing I suggested too, I think I put in my letter is, I mean, you could potentially cantilever the inlet edge of the walkway that approved a catwalk. I suppose you could always cantilever the last foot or 2. It wouldn't touch the land. The idea is to try to get to the water without crumbling the edge of the marsh. Any way that could be done, I'm sure we'd be okay with it.
But don't you think, okay.
I mean, you have to get to the float. I mean,
No, I understand that.
you have to get to the float. What's the least? Because it doesn't really matter to the boat owner. She just wants to get there safely and without doing damage to the marsh. If there's a way to do it, we're open to it.
Well, I have a quick question. Maybe I don't understand. What we have here? We've got a float. We've got a fixed catwalk.
Right.
And we have a ramp.
The catwalk has fixed sections, and at the float end, there's a hinged portion. I call that the ramp. The hinged portion that can go up and down as the float does. And on the inland side, there's also a hinged ramp which lands on the edge of the marsh.
Well,
So I call them both
the
ramps.
ramp actually ends well into the marsh. I mean,
It's shown on the survey.
Well,
It's shown on. We have a survey that shows.
I'm not sure
there's a
what,
photo of it.
I'm not
I
sure
sent
what,
that to
if
you
you're
as well.
talking about
The landward section.
Maybe-
catwalk
Yeah.
ending on what you're claiming is trustee property, or the ramp to the catwalk ending on what
I
you're.
believe the ramp, because the ramp is the only thing that touches the ground. The fixed catwalk doesn't touch the ground. Only the hinged ramp on the inlet side of it touches the ground.
So what you're asking is for the ramp to touch the ground and then going to a catwalk with 8 pilings driven into the marsh.
No, it's at the bottom end. The pilings are in the bottom end of the creek.
The marsh.
You're showing pilings in the marsh?
And I have additional pictures as
I
well.
can't tell where those pilings are. I'd have to be in the water to look at them.
Ben, can you see from my pictures?
I don't think they sit in the marsh.
There's the float on top of it.
I don't think they sit in the marsh.
Yeah.
That's not my recollection. I think they're in the.
That picture was taken today at 10 o'clock, and I believe high tide was 12, so it's getting on to high tide. And it's a moon tide today. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what
I don't recall being that high.
what you're proposing, Rick, is you're asking us to challenge the town's ownership of the marshland.
Oh, well, not really.
Because you're asking us to give you permission on land that the town claims at this point. And in order to do that, we have to challenge that.
I'm not sure if they're claiming it, but let me just say this. The location of wherever the pond leaves or posts are today can be moved, right? I mean, if there's a question of whether it's landing in the marsh, we can make sure that it lands in the creek. Also, as I said, you can cantilever, you could have something that would stick out that was sturdy enough that you could step off the marsh and get on the catwalk. I mean, I think there's a way to do it without landing on the town property. The other thing I just have to say,
For a permit to get started?
Well, I mean, but what I see happening here is we don't have an application for a catwalk. Do we have an actual application for a catwalk? Because it should not exist today.
I'm trying to remember whether we've submitted you a formal application. I mean, all along since last year, we've made it clear we're looking to legalize what we had.
Right.
And that was originally the 8 foot by 10 foot float.
I thought that we had agreed that what was permitted was a 4 by 8 foot or 4 by 10 foot float.
Right.
Nothing else. So.
I'm not.
And now this catwalk exists, okay? There's never been an application submitted for it, and you're asking us to just accept it.
Put yourself in Cynthia's shoes, all right? She bought the property, there was a catwalk, it was disassembled, it was on the land.
I understand that, but.
The catwalk was there, we know, for at least 19 years.
Mhm.
Where were the trustees? If it's illegal, how come you didn't catch it?
We did.
Buys
We
the
bought it.
property.
We bought it.
Yeah, after we buy the property and ask for a permit for what's
We're
there.
responsible for other, previous boards.
Okay, but I mean, we didn't build the catwalk. She didn't build the catwalk.
I
She
understand
inherited
that.
it.
I understand that, but she improved it, and that was her biggest mistake.
I agree. I agree. She should not have touched it without coming to the
Without
trustees.
permits, there was no application done.
I
As far
understand.
as I'm concerned, she built the existing catwalk without the permit.
Which begs the question, we went back to exactly what the catwalk was before. Would you approve that? And again, it sounds like you're having some issues. But-
I think we have to have more discussion on it. That's my view. There are 8 other members of this board.
I have a simple question. Is this a good structure for the harbor? How does it impact the harbor? Is this a good thing? I don't.
So Susan, let me try to answer that question. All right. The owner has a mooring, which you've granted her. All right. Pretty hard to deny moorings to people who are in the harbor. I mean, there's no marinas on Accabonac. She's a shorefront or almost a shorefront property owner in Accabonac. She's got a mooring. Her predecessor has had either a dock or a mooring for the past 36 years. The question is not, I don't think, whether a sailboat moored in Accabonac Harbor is a problem. The question is, how do you get to it? What's the least impactful way to get to it?
No, I understand what you're saying, but
Well, line and pulley mooring would be the least impactful way.
What?
Line and pulley, ball and pulley mooring where you could
To
keep
the
the dinghy.
dinghy, and then you have to take the dinghy out to the sailboat?
That would be the least impactful.
You still have to get down the edge of the marsh and get into the dinghy.
You're gonna have a small.
well, that's
footpath.
okay.
Well,
So you're gonna have a footpath down there.
no, I would say, but going down the edge of the marsh, you're still going to go down that bank to clamber into the boat.
Thank you so much.
And that's the one thing that the catwalk does today. For minimal shading of the bottom land, the catwalk keeps you from having to go down the edge of the tidal marsh.
Rick, when I think of catwalk, and I read Larry's memo
Mhm.
from them as well, I think there's a float floating in the water, anchored, not pilings in, but anchors. And then there's something that goes from land to the float that goes up and down. So all there is landward are wheels or something fixed on a hinge. That's different than what we see here. We see the ramp to a fixed catwalk dock.
It's really a pier.
Yeah.
Small pier.
I mean, if you take your argument about Larry's recommendation, I don't think the trustees picked up on it. personally, because I think they understood that it wasn't the homeowner's land that was being landed on, so they just gave them the float. But nevertheless, I'm thinking of the catwalk as just a catwalk between somewhere on the marsh that you can walk and the float, not up to a fixed structure and then to the float.
Well, okay, John, keep in mind that one of the reasons we're in the particular situation we are is because that's what we inherited. And I understand she put in, sturdier poles and everything, but she inherited the fixed catwalk. So again, if there's a different method whereby she can get to the float, where she doesn't have to clamber up and down the bank, it seems to me it's in everybody's interest. And so there's a different way to, skin the cat, so to speak. We'd be open to it. If you want to suggest we take a different approach and you give me enough guidance that I can do that, I'd go back to the client and say, let's try to do something different. I mean, I'm looking in part to your expertise and, what different methodologies exist.
There are other methodologies out there that could be looked at. Rick, if you want to talk about it
Yeah,
sometime.
all right. I mean, at this point, we would lose the float anyway. We have to get a new float because we're not, we're already conceding. We can't keep the existing float. It's bigger than was originally approved. Replacing the catwalk is not that big of a deal. So, I mean, if you want me to meet with a couple of the board members, and I'd probably want Cynthia to be part of that, we're open to anything that'll allow her to get out there to the boat and not damage the edge of the marsh.
Right across the way is a nice little sailboat that's buoyed, and the woman who owns it just goes right out and gets in her sailboat, unfurls the sail, and off she goes. What are these poles in the water that are connected? This is a couple of weeks ago now, but these are poles that are, and then.
What is those? The old poles that have to be removed still?
I think that those are the.
Yeah,
poles.
some were.
Yeah, those are the old.
We're trying to get, I know Cynthia has made an effort.
Yeah, some were lying on the catwalk itself.
Well, the float's not in there, right?
But those-
The float's not in the water, right?
I have this one here.
No, but that was taken earlier in the beginning of this year, but the float's not in the water right now.
This is 2 weeks
Yeah,
ago.
those
I
are the
did
poles,
those.
those are the poles that the float was attached to.
Right,
those
2 of these
tall
poles were lying in the catwalk that was up on the land
I think,
when I took the
I think you
pictures.
removed the rusted ones.
Here's what happened. See,
I know she was trying to get rid of them. The contractor was waiting in.
When this picture was
I know she's
taken,
made a good faith effort to remove.
when this picture was taken, I think that very night it froze up. And then the next couple of days, there was ice that bent the poles that the float was attached to.
How many feet is the catwalk?
I don't know, unless it's in one of my letters, I don't recall.
30, 25 to 30 feet, if those poles are.
It's not, John, I'm sure it's not 30 feet.
Well,
It might be in the 20s, I don't remember.
Poles, I don't think they're either 8 or 10 feet apart, I would say. It could be 6.
across the way is a motorboat, right?
So Rick, I'm listening to the trustee feedback and I'm comparing that with what I'm looking at on the GIS overheads and putting those two together. I think what the trustees seem to be hung up on is, and when I'm looking at these overheads, I'm looking at 2020, 16, 13, 2010, 2007, 2006, 2004, 2001. In all of those except 2020, the catwalk is in a position that it's moved. It's not there connecting anything. So it's been a removable catwalk historically. It's never been a fixed structure like it is now. Again, the only photo I see where it's actually in place where it needs to be is the last GIS 2020. And all other 8 of them, it's not there. You can kind of see it upland in bits and pieces or whatnot.
It's supposed to be removed every winter. I don't know what happened here other than the float's not there and she just sort of left it be. But no, the idea would be that it would be removable.
I haven't seen these recent photos, but it doesn't sound like it's removable, right? It's on.
Well, the posts are much sturdier now. I think the little pipes that were earlier used probably would be easier to put in and pull out. So, look, you know what the objective is there. Just explained it. So if you would like us to meet with some of the board members, it's unfortunate that there's the confusion about this, but I want you to understand her point of view too. It's, that she bought it as it is, more or less as it is, and it had been there. We knew it was there for 20 years from aerial photographs, and then we got the ones caught,
I mean, I think to Francis's point, he'd like to see more discussion on it, so.
Yeah.
I think so too. I have a
Let's just
quick
table
question.
this.
I'm on a committee. I'm happy to meet with you at some point.
I mean, do you think you can give us, Guy, you know what we're trying to get to. The question is,
I am in the marine industry. I'm aware of different alternatives for dock building, for dock materials, for securing, for moorings. We deploy moorings, we do dock building, we have carpenters that do that. So, I mean, I'm aware of what the alternatives are. Are they agreeable to the board? I have no idea, but we can lay out some alternatives and see what might be the most palatable to put on an application.
okay,
If that's, I mean, as I said, Francis had suggested more discussion. I think that's in line with
I think
that.
that would be appropriate to have more discussion
we're not
about
ready
it.
and even the discussion's not gonna lead anywhere that I want to know that, but.
Well, I'm just sure, I
Possible to
can
find a
share
way.
industry information with you that presents alternatives. How you choose to use it as the applicant's representative, that's up to you guys. But I mean, our group, I think, we have some people that are fairly familiar with the waters that could offer.
The board doesn't have a clear consensus at this
Well, I
point.
think we have another issue to consider in all this. And I mean, I understand your point of how do I get to the float, at the least impactful way. I'd like to do that. I'd like to work with you on that. But we also have this issue that I think we have to discuss of, backsliding on past dictates by this board, not the least of which is a bans on docks, which have in the past sort of slid into, well, we won't call this a dock, we'll call it something else. And, there are other docks on other harbors that, were maybe not approved, maybe were approved and are different now. And, we just don't want to, we have that. whole-
No, I understand. But John, bear in mind, this is one for which we know there was a trustee permit. And for some 36 years, the trustees took the annual fee. So we are different from a lot of these other examples.
Understood.
And we also acknowledge that the original float was 40 square feet, and we're not asking to go beyond that.
Does handicapped access come into this any place?
Not that I know of.
I know there was an issue with the dock in Montauk about it.
I mean, it's not a public dock, it's a private, it's actually serving one private residence. So I don't think, ADA issues apply here. All right, well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. So Lovey, I'll be happy to reach out to Rick and maybe another board member too. And
On a table, you can schedule
Yes.
a meeting with.
Table.
Please.
Right, I don't know, John, do you want to weigh in? You're pretty familiar with it.
Yeah, sure.
Speak.
all right, thanks. I took enough of your time.
Thanks.
All right, sir.
Have a good evening.
you ready to speak?
Yeah, just briefly.
Come up to the lectern. No, what happened for us?
My name's Paul Roman. I've spoken to the trustees several years back about some issues and about the clam event coming up in October. Apparently now it's going to actually happen rather than as an event.
Yes.
And back prior to the COVID stuff, I had volunteered my services to make the chowder to be given away at the event. So, Susan, I would just like to again say that I would love to do that. I'm actually probably your only 4-time winner of the trustees chowder contest. But the other thing was we spoke a while back about clam pies.
Yes.
And my hope then was it was moving forward. And when I was doing research, I found there was a lot more interest going on with the clam pie now. It had been kind of disappearing. And there's a couple of people here, there. Was my decision was to showcase the clam pie at the clam event. Not to have a contest, not to make it a competition to do it, but have somebody, if you have a great clam pie, bring one. Your aunt makes one, somebody, try to get them. And the only way I can see to get that going at this point would be simple, a letter to the editor in the Star saying, we want to do this, and this is our contact information.
Mm-hmm.
I could do the same thing. I found a lot of research when I was researching old recipes on like Bonnick Eats. But I'm not going to put something that says that you should contact somebody. There should be a central thing for that. And I think we could probably get enough people to make it interesting for the first time. And it's really,
Like a tasting of different clam pies.
yeah, I mean, so something that's there, like even with the clam chowder contest, there's virtually no chowder that's entered in it that people get to taste. There's a little bit at the end. But this would be solely for that purpose. You can see it. If they want to give out a recipe, fine. If they want to put somebody's name on it, fine. You know,
We can do this.
yeah, I
We
think
can do it.
we
It can
can,
be
and I would
something
like to
added
speak with you and,
onto this year's contest.
right.
We're looking for ideas and
But not as a contest,
No,
more
no,
as a
no.
showcase
for
and,
the clam contest. I'm saying,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
looking for things to do, to make it interesting and fun and everything. And I think it sounds like a great idea. So I have your number, I have your
good,
email.
and we can speak.
We'll
further.
talk tomorrow.
There's a loyal
Is that good?
following
Sounds good.
of people that enjoy clam
Oh, I
pies.
know. And starting a year ago, when I started to do it, and I was going on Bonnet Eats, suddenly there were more pictures of people who made clam pies. Oh, you know,
Well, we can include that on our announcement that we.
and into the thing in the East Hampton Star that under the government section. We like you have the,
Used to have the contest at Fisherman's Fair, right? Is there no longer clam pie?
excuse me?
Fisherman's Fair used to have clam pie.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think.
I haven't heard from them this year
They have it?
about the Fisherman's Fair. Normally I get something in the mail because I always sign up for
What
it.
group runs that?
I think in the past it's been, I've always reached out to Lauren. But I was by there today and I didn't see anything. Normally by now, it's usually around August 17th or so. So I'm not sure that they're going to have it this year, but I'll check and find out. But to your idea, which you always have good ideas, Paul, I will be happy to write a letter and add this. You know, I'm the chairperson this year. I volunteered myself in.
If you give me a contact, I'll put it on Bonnet Eats unless you want to do it.
Oh, no, well, why don't we talk?
Yeah, that's a good idea. And this is, the Bonnet clam pie is like this micro-regional specialty. It's nowhere on the planet, basically, unless somebody took it from here. So it should be like.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds
That's
good.
it.
I will call you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Tuesday, thank you so much for coming in.
so long.
Thanks for hanging in there on all this.
Okay.
Now you owe us a pie. All right.
Since the crystal didn't play.
Okay, let's move down. New business. I think we have some final news on the staggered terms.
Oh, okay, yes, very quickly. It was signed August 3rd by Governor Cuomo, so we are in.
Right.
2023, it will be for that election, not this upcoming election. So the first five, as you know, the top vote getters, they will have 4-year terms, and 4 remaining will have 2-year terms. And then in 2 years, they run again, and they get a chance to be 4 years.
But the way we set it up,
Rotate.
continue to be 5 trustees up for election,
And then
and then 4, and then 5, and then 4.
Right, so it always rotates.
The main reason we wanted to do it was to try and give the public a better opportunity to spend, to look over the candidates.
Right, and also
Not
to
having a herd.
give stability to the projects that we're doing.
And, you know, it also gives you time on the board to
Well-
continue a complex project.
Yes, Bill and Jim and I were on that committee, so I want to thank you, Bill.
When you
thanks,
like
Jim.
that deal,
Jim's not here, but yeah, when we had an article in the paper, and it's on our it's on our website.
Nice work.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice
Thank you,
to-
Bill.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, aquaculture. John, preliminary committee discussions of kelp culture and trustee waters.
Yes, we've had some requests to grow kelp in trustee waters in the past, and we have some inquiries now. We met as a part of the agriculture committee, sort of preliminarily discuss where we might want to go with this. And Marley's was here and he couldn't stay, but I know why he was here, so maybe I'll just start with that. He, as you know, we've authorized him to sort of, grow kelp, not necessarily experimentally, but just to sort of see how it grows in the lower part of 3 Mile Harbor and also in the outer part of 3 Mile Harbor next winter. He was approached by a citizens group, the Aquatic Protection Committee, that would make money available for him to extend that evaluation of kelp growing to a place in Aquatic Harbor, and that's what he was here to request, and presumably he'll be at the next meeting to make that request. So we have one harbor in which we're evaluating kelp growing and the nitrogen that it may extract from the water and the difficulty of growing it and how well it grows and how to extract the product from the water, things like that. And if we approve a second site, we'll have another harbor's look at how kelp grows there. So in discussing these private interests that are coming to us with kelp culture, we don't have a comprehensive aquaculture policy. So the first thing that we've understood, I think, is that if we start approving kelp culture, we probably will get requests for oyster culture and maybe some other cultures in the harbor. So we kind of ultimately need a comprehensive look at how we are or aren't going to deal with aquaculture in trustee waters. So then we were thinking, well, okay, now what about these requests that we have? So we kind of came up with what we felt were perhaps two options for the board to consider. First option is we will hold off on any requests from private people to grow kelp until we get information on the evaluation that Barley's doing, which will be in one or hopefully, from my perspective, hopefully two options. Second option, and if you recall back to what was it called?
Promised Land
Kelp Company. Yes.
They had come to us requesting to evaluate growing kelp in several locations in town waters. And we were considering that, and they actually unilaterally decided to pull back because they had feedback from other people. So along those lines, another option would be we're looking at a town-sponsored kelp growing project in one or two harbors, and we could authorize private individuals to perhaps look at the two other harbors. I don't think Creek is kind of too small, I think, to do any consideration, but perhaps Northwest Creek and Nat Peak Harbor, along the lines that we were, being presented with Promised Land Company's evaluation concept. So it would be one winter. They would have to get all the permits for themselves. They would have no, we would have the option to continue this project privately or not continue it privately. So those were kind of where we were thinking, the board could kind of grapple with, where we think we should go with this.
We heard from a representative of the Bandits Association, and they wanted rather wide ranging access for powering, basically everywhere that Farley's not seeding in every water body. And we now have interest here to explore private forms of aquaculture. And we have the town program, which I like the barley direction of getting some data on this. I think that's a very palatable first step. But, we have the greater kind of public that's always enjoyed access to the bottomlands and the waters. And, there's, I think, a lot of interest in how to leverage public resources for profit. When we're seeing it, throughout the day with the county programs, and had several people approach for kelp, and we've had people, some very close to this board, that have expressed interest in wanting to do aquaculture in trustee waters as well. As soon as this was mentioned, it's like, well, why should we be doing oysters and other shellfish? And so, this could get out of the gate pretty quickly. So I would just caution that, we are thoughtful on how quickly we open this up. And personally, I would just like to see some feedback from barley. And one of the things that I would look to understand is what is the time frame to get some credible data from barley, because kelp typically is deeper, cooler water type product. And, is it something that's even going to be successful before we start going out allotments? So
what you're describing is what we spoke about at the meeting for quite some time in the office, and Barley and John and myself, mulling this over, and you're pointing out the conversation, our discussion about just that, where we take it slowly, and we like the fact that it's being instigated, if you will, or that Barley has an interest in starting something to see how kelp would do. And then we thought, if there are interested one or two people who might want to, and as John said, go make sure that they have their own permits and so forth, they have to do all the work to do that, that they would go to another harbor area. And it gives us some data that would be important. But this is a very thoughtful approach that the three of us discussed. And I know, Bill, you're on this committee.
Yeah, we had, all of these things come down to conflicts of view, and we should
be sensitive to.
We have to be sensitive to them. We have to hear them all out. I mean, a public hearing, like, whatever allows.
Right.
Well, first we have to sort of decide what it is we're.
I mean, I like the idea of Barley going ahead, because we need that basic data to see if it's going to work or not.
Right. And it is a town project.
We've so far been given at least two very detailed, well thought out plans. Private groups want to do this, but one group is fairly advanced in their thinking, and some of the public reaction they got caused them to back off. So,
I agree totally with you that, that we have to, to go forward with this, we have to have a policy.
Yeah.
I guess what we're talking about is what do we want to do something short of a policy, and what would that be? Would it be just, the town evaluating it on its own through Barley, or do we want to expand it and allow some private people to enter into the same evaluation, in effect, before we then look at, or at the same time, we're looking at, what are we going to do? What would we want to do with that agriculture?
I'm just concerned, as soon as you prove a private endeavor, you open up Pandora's box. And now, how do you tell someone else from the private sector they can't?
Well, also, we did attach, though, that if we had one or two people who wanted to in other harbors, they would give that data back to Barley. So it would be almost under the umbrella of Shellfish
But you set
Hatchery.
a precedent of private individuals having the use of public bottomland, and I think
Yeah, I can see,
that's a real.
But
Well,
we
it's-
have
I guess-
that, right? I mean, we have, well, fish traps, for one thing. I mean, the trustees actually have a fee structure for fish traps inside the harbors.
Yeah, that's.
we talked about that as well. at the meeting.
Or marinas.
Marinas.
Yeah.
But I,
And we have granted, seaweed growing projects and by, it's not for profit, but it is to, a separate entity outside the town. And we did write a letter of support for another one that didn't get funded.
it also science.
There's a distinction there between private, but I guess, if this were granted, if we went without the second option where we expanded to a couple of other harbors, it would be with the understanding that they're in effect, gathering data for us. And, there's no assurance that we
Continue.
continue.
How much, what is the minimum footprint of a science-based?
In effect,
endeavor?
what Barley's doing is 3 100-foot strings spaced about 20 feet apart. So it's at this point, it's a relatively small.
I think, if they were all to be of the same size.
Yeah.
then
Well, they would be. Yeah, I mean, that would be,
Not a big
that's
hit
the
on
idea.
Public access.
I think we could approve that now.
Prove what?
I mean, probably going forward with this program.
He hasn't really asked this yet, so I don't know.
And I think he should come and present what it is he wants to do, but I think it's,
It's a good introduction. John.
That's like a different category.
Yeah, we don't have
But like you
to.
said, Rick, if one's approved, it's going to open a Pandora's box. So we have to be prepared for that.
Right.
What is the
What is
policy?
the
gonna
rollout? What is there a rollout plan? that-
there's still
What do you
plenty
think?
to discuss before.
Yeah, it's like things like, how do we do, first of all, if we want to go down the road, do we want to go down by permit, like a fish trap, like a pound trap permit? There's pound trap permits within the harbor. Wherever the guy wants to put his trap, he applies for a permit, he gets it. You could go that route, wherever you want to put your oyster farm or your kelp farm, we'll look at it, prove it, or say you can't do
You
it.
can't do it on a seating area, so to speak.
Yeah, or do we
Or the
zone
mooring
things
field
out?
or Whatever it is.
We go that way. And certainly, public input has got to be right up front.
We're still struggling with our moorings and docks, so, if we get into another channel of engagement here, are we, further?
Well,
Spread
one
ourselves thin.
difference that I see personally anyway with both kelp and oysters is that there is an ancillary benefit to water quality.
Mhm.
So there is something there.
Maybe there's a way to multi-purpose certain areas, like the mooring field in the winter or marina base in the winter when it's not boats.
Oh, and that's the other thing, it grows in the winter.
So maybe there is a way to
It's not during the
platoon
summer.
some of these areas more effectively.
Right. There's lots of ways this could go.
Be
Thomas
continued.
Jefferson.
Yeah, well, this is where we have to be. We have to start having this conversation.
I think kelp growing season is mainly
Winter.
in the off season.
Yeah, more or less late October to April.
But the request from the Promised Land Kelp Company says they start harvesting in April, but that's the first of 3 harvests, with the first one being in April. And then it doesn't go on to say when harvest numbers 2 and 3 are, which presumably would be after April and May.
It's
So
about Memorial Day.
I don't think they
I
can
think
go
it
too
goes-
far.
Not beyond May, if my memory serves me correctly, that it would be done, they'd be finished by May.
Yeah, it could go, no, well, it could go
End
into
of
May.
May.
Well, that's tight if we're
Yeah,
allowing
it's
the
not
mooring
winter.
fields. We can't have them like harvesting kelp or trying to put in moorings. Keep that.
But if there was an orange.
Well, yeah.
Well, there's more to discussion to be had, but it's a good introductory conversation.
It would be good to not with this past five and to keep the discussion going.
But we do have an active request at this point.
For private participation.
Well, someone asked to grow kelp and is sort of feeling us out for where we're headed with this.
So, I mean, I'd love to have Barley present and then use that as a metric to measure against the private application. So
Yeah, I
if we
think
could
he's the
get
good
back to this next meeting, I think that would be helpful.
I think we're gonna
Put him up
That was
front.
the baseline.
I think we're gonna have to promise to put him up first.
Right, that's what you said. Make him be number one, because, yeah, he
Gotta
did.
provide leadership.
But, okay.
I would just briefly go back to John's opening remark, which I would recommend sort of developing, even if it's a changing over time, some type of policy by resolution. That of course it can be a working product and it can change from year to year, but to have something in place prior to granting any approvals that you guys have really thought out, I think would go a long way to protecting the trustees from any future challenges. So I think
That was the intent of our meeting last week, to at least begin to, introduce it and discuss it and then bring it to the board.
Does it make you uncomfortable then to sort of include private growers in an evaluation program on that basis, not having a policy established? If option two, where Barley's doing 2 harbors, we want 2 other harbors, also to be evaluated, say we'll entertain 2 other private people who want to grow it. Something.
Well, how would we collect the data from the private grower? Are they going to know what to?
And would the focus be strictly on the study, or their focus would be on a for-profit? They're going to give us data, but then they're going to be making money. It's almost like they're already giving a chance to do it for a couple of years.
The idea was we wouldn't give them a commercial size plot. We tailor it to the same size that Barley's doing, 3 100-foot strings, which they can sell it if they want to, but they're not going to make a lot of money.
Learn and burn.
I mean, I guess, how do you see?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to reserve opinion for now. I think we should talk more about it, but ultimately there should be a way that you can approve, a study, a small study like that in line with what Barley's doing.
Unless there's a way for people to make money doing this, it's not gonna amount to much.
It might not come up.
There's some interesting articles in Newsday that you should go back and read.
I looked at them.
They can do pretty well. I believe a 1 acre site can produce about 70 grand.
70 grand?
Who's going to sign?
Where's my permit?
So that's what I mean.
I know, it's the new gold rush, right? Everybody wants to join up. Okay. Well, to be continued.
How much are the permits gonna be?
70 grand.
10% of the
Okay, roads, request from Thomas Osborne of Osborne and McGowan PC on behalf of the owners of 141 Merchants Path, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-155-1-3.3, to be granted an access easement over Trustee Road in order to access Merchants Path.
So Francis, I am familiar with this property in the area. In the 1980s, we had 2 subdivisions put in Huckleberry Woods and 6 Pole Acres. I think John Leonard was the developer of these back in the 80s. And he orchestrated some of the original easements granting access up to Merchants Highway. The subject property is actually across the Trustee Fire Trail or Woodland Trail that goes up to Merchants Path. It's over here, it's somewhat landlocked, and they're looking to piggyback on the roadbed that's there and get an easement over, a small piece of the Trustee Road. And this has got to be kind of laid together to really see the property the way it is.
What's this here?
That goes back to Town Line Road, maybe, Trustee Road, there's a bunch of paper roads through there, but I believe they're looking to get up to Merchant's Path. If I understood the request, they're looking to go up to Merchant's Path or Slough Highway. So they're heading in this direction, and I believe, I'm looking at Chris, there's a section here that they need to get across that is understood to be trustee property. And it may be that this whole section is trustee property, and these subdivisions are also taking access for some of their lots there.
So they're just looking to take access from the end of the road that's already on this.
I believe that's correct, yes.
So this is being used now
I believe so.
by other.
Yeah, you see there's entrances to Chelsea Woods and to Six Pole Woods. When you drive up Merchant's Path towards that one town line, you'll see that on the left side.
Are there existing easements on that? For the other-
Yeah, I remember John Leonard working on those easements back in the 80s.
Mhm.
Francis has the original survey in his folder.
Yeah.
I actually lived there. I don't know if he's still there.
Yeah, I believe he kept a couple of lots
Yeah.
until quite recently. So he's living there up until, I'm not sure if he's still living in town. But I know he was quite active and owned quite a bit of real estate in the area back in the 70s.
I'm not mistaken, that was this whole subdivision.
It's a single piece.
That's-
Yeah.
Right, and the merchants go this way.
Yeah.
Right, so where the area of,
Merchants is up here.
Yeah.
And
The area that
Suffolk and
we're
Six
speaking about
Pole.
is in here that they need to?
Yeah, they're looking, I think, I think this is the subject lot.
Are you saying that?
Oh, here, this is, okay, there you go.
Yes,
Rick, my only concern is whether we're gonna take this to be true, that this trustee roadbed or comes up and then just stops here.
Right.
It almost seems, I don't know, is that true? Or is this property that's owned by this landowner that they need to traverse? Is it trustee land or not?
Well,
Why
if this
does our
is the
roadbed
end,
stop there?
Well, if we want, we can take a closer look, Chris, if you want to go down there.
well, here's a question. If this is the end of the trustee road right there, this is the driveway that they need to cross over our road, correct?
No, but that's a continuation of this road.
Right, but
That's just a driveway.
that's the driveway.
Okay.
And here's deck, wood walkway. Where's the residence? It's just a deck right now? And wooden walkway. So I think that this is the area that they have to cross over, the end of
No,
the
but
trustee
it
road,
is.
no?
Well, I'm questioning veracity of the survey. I don't know. I just want to make sure before we approve anything that this isn't actually owned
On
by
their
this
property?
landowner, and they actually need to get across.
But isn't that the end of the road for the trustees right there?
Well, this is another subdivision.
Right.
So
Yes.
these are two subdivisions
Right.
that I believe were put together in the 80s.
Right, but,
And they
but,
take access here, and the access was via trustee easements.
So the question
Right.
is, why would this road stop like that?
Right.
So abruptly?
Or maybe it stops, my point
Maybe that
being,
was-
it's possible that it would stop here. And it's just conveniently now gone extended
Well, it
via
would
survey
still-
to there.
If this is a trustee road, they would still need access over these.
but,
lateral
and these were
portion.
created after the trustee road was already here. So my question is, if this is the end of the trustee road right there, the driveway is just, they're just wanting to access it over that little portion
Oh,
right there,
I
right?
understand that, yep.
So this is new. I'm sure the trustee road was there before these subdivisions were created in the 80s.
Yes, I think-
Vincent Cavello, I know his
I
property
think
right here.
I think Mr. Leonard quit claimed that property to the trustees because there was questions about these paper roads.
Right,
He
right.
clarified it and then
Created-
got an easement.
Created this. and
I
gave
believe
it
so. Yes, he quit claimed that, I believe. That's
To
my
access
recollection.
all these.
Yeah,
Okay.
and made sure there was no dispute over who owned the paper road.
He didn't
Okay.
need to access this because it's
So
county.
he only gave away what he had to.
Yeah, it's true, that makes sense.
And I think it makes sense.
So
it does-
what are we giving a permit for? Just this
It's
little
an easement,
tiny?
just
Well,
an
the
easement.
easement, but to
Yeah.
also use the existing road bed that
Yes.
was explained to the trustees, which is the access to the entire length.
Right, and already these lots
Are
are
using, some of
using,
those lots are. at
right,
least.
okay.
What's the purpose of us keeping? What's the purpose of that road for the public? It only accesses private property.
Yes, but the trustees, there is documentation that Arlene forwarded to me that the trustees, and there was a resolution, I believe, will grant access to landlocked properties that
Yes,
don't
we
have
passed the
access.
acknowledging of all our merchants' path things so that people.
I know
would-
Passing Road
I think that
in
was
my
forward
neighborhood
That was
last
was the
week. That
same,
was
yeah.
last
where it's
week,
a
I think
trustee
you did.
road.
Susan, it's on your map, you know, the map that you framed, we'll circulate.
Yes, it's in the
This
office.
little slip in the middle of nowhere
Right.
is owned by the trustees.
It
on your map.
is
We'll
part of
walk
our charter by resolution to
To acknowledge.
grant access to landlocked properties. We don't have to.
Passing Road, since your roads, Passing Road
Why couldn't they
behind where I
do it
am
themselves?
has the trustee road problem as well, where they have to access through the,
Why couldn't they-
Mr. Leonard wasn't clear. He didn't have title to this sliver. It was a paper road. He thought it was trustee property, but maybe it wasn't clear. So to clarify, he quitclaimed what his rights were to the trustees. No one else disputed it. So that's my layman's understanding. Chris, I don't know if you can put an edge on that, but
No, that makes sense. I'm okay with it.
you want to wait 2 weeks and just dot the i's and cross the t's, just to be extra safe?
Sure. Yeah. Just like to make sure we're not granting access over.
I think, it might take,
Property.
So there should be a copy of the quick claim.
yeah, we should dig that up. And I'd like to just walk down that road one more time and just see where those stakes are for the road and for the neighboring properties.
Chris, quick claims are filed with the county?
They should be. It didn't have to be. It could just be in our file, but yes, it should be recorded. in the
we
public
can
record.
always call Steve Warner.
Okay, so we'll double check. So, let's table that until the next meeting. Chris. I think we can wrap this up.
All right, 3 Mile Harbor. CBA notice of a complete application from Joel Falsey of Lighthouse Land Planning on behalf of George Schwartz, owner of 32 Hedges Bank Drive, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-35-5-1, was applied to the town for permission to install a pool house and deck.
Well, yeah, well, I think some of us got notice from the ZBA. The application is complete and they're calling for comment. I haven't looked at the application yet.
I would
Quite
assume
sure
this
what
is
it
at the
is.
top of the bluff,
It's at the top of the
so why would we have any interest?
Yeah, we're neighboring properties, that's. what we-
Yeah, we're an adjacent property owner. I don't know, it says here, application, removal of house. But then the second page really only talks about constructing a pool house, and a patio. So I was gonna look at the application and see what the story is. Just see what this, proximity to the bluff is, and if there's anything there that, would be, we would want to weigh in on.
Okay, so you want to table that?
Looks like the existing improvements there were way up by the road and nowhere near the bluff. FYI.
What do you got? What are you looking at?
I'm just looking at the GIS overheads from 2020.
Yeah, I guess what,
There is some type of, I'd call it a deck or a patio down the path at the bluff, at the crest of the bluff.
Pool.
Yeah.
there's no pool
property.
there.
There is a pool, yeah.
Oh, there is a pool.
Your ponds, yes?
What?
Your ponds, Georgia Pond,
Yes.
ponds, okay. You got this today?
I saw the, I saw it.
Oh, okay,
It was
okay.
after you mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
after it goes. His email?
Yes, no, that's, yeah, so I just wanted to make sure, because I didn't know who saw it or not.
Mhm.
That's why I implied all, so that other
And
people.
we haven't, I don't think, talked about that, I guess, when we get to.
Yeah, that's not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just,
No, I'm just, I have questions.
Yes, but, okay,
Old business.
here I am.
Signs for kayak rack, permit required to store your kayak.
Okay, I don't know if we have a camera on or not, but I'm holding up, here's the current sign for everybody, right? Which we have on the kayak racks. It's made out of a plastic front. And we need new signs because a lot of these are cracked, so.
Foam core.
Foam core, okay, but the front is a plastic
Right.
thing. So I called the highway department, as I said I would, last meeting. And they gave me Granger, which is the company that they have made signs from. So what we need to do is order the signs, aluminum signs I'm going for. And I thought yellow would be a good color, although Francis said it's a caution sign.
That's a safety.
Safety sign. But yellow I thought would attract people because I cannot tell you how many people say they don't see any signs. Then they want to know, do I need a permit?
There's signs all over.
I know, but I thought yellow, and then just instead of this way, so that the kayaks don't crack them or bend them, we do it this way. And it would be black lettering with our, use of kayak racks, whatever. And the total number is under, I think, Francis, you're agreeable that we do this, and I just wanted to run it by everybody. They're $12.50 each, for a total of $482 for 40 of them. We need 32, but we rounded off the number in case something gets damaged. And then I would take all the signs over to the highway department and they will paint them up and just get them put back up. Thinking maybe for next spring, so they don't have to go through the winter. Can I make a motion to purchase these signs?
Are we gonna go with yellow? Because I honestly,
If you want white,
I don't think people are gonna, you see yellow, but they're not gonna see black.
I go white.
So it's right.
Okay, so, all right, fine. Then we'll
White.
order red.
Yeah,
Okay, white with red lettering. I have to go to the highway department now and ask them for red. Are you listening, highway department?
If they say they don't do it, point to the no parking sign.
Okay, all right, because they did say that, yes. And then we did have these permits for 5 kayaks per row, but we're thinking maybe for the next year, because 5 seems to be the problem, where people are saying, I paid for my permit, I can't get my kayak in there because everybody's putting theirs flat. So maybe we need to go back to 4 on a rack.
We discussed this.
we
at the
did that
last
2 years
meeting.
ago, yeah.
Okay, so I'm reiterating. That's kayak racks. So are we voting on purchasing or? I'll make a motion to purchase 40. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye. Okay, thank you. Stagger turns to did.
Okay, committee reports, agriculture, mosquito larvae surveys.
Well, I'll start. Edwina was back. Thank you, Edwina Moncal, for being my partner again today. We covered our polygon, and indeed, because we've had so much rain, we did come to our hotspots, which were definitely filled with all sorts of stages of larvae. And I'm sure that we will, it will require treatment. But, it was wet as expected and beautiful though. In many of the hotspots now, it's less and less drainage and water left over and a lot of plantings and lots of fire, I always call them fire dragons, dragonflies. So that was my experience this morning. And John?
Yeah, I found mostly later stage, actually, stage 3 and stage 4. So
Mhm.
they probably will be using combination methadone, PPIs, pelletized treatments.
And I'm going to reiterate and say, because still people think that it's spraying on Accabonac Harbor. It's not. It is actually helicopters nose diving and distributing the pellets directly to the hotspots because we use our computers and it's done with the GIS. They see exactly where you're located when you send in the information. So it's what I'd like to see, and I don't know if it's possible. We've discussed it before with Tom Iwaneko, who's the Suffolk County vector control head, is seeing this project go elsewhere in our community if possible, so that we don't have as much pesticide, because other areas are being sprayed, need treatment, and it would be, I believe everybody would be happier with this sort of thing. If we have to have treatment, this is a designated, targeted treatment. And if you've ever seen the helicopters, they really do nosedive and then swoop right out. It's a little frightening, frankly, but so I don't know, maybe we'll talk to Tom and see if other areas that are sprayed, maybe the community, I think, people in Lazy Point have told me that their cars are covered in black mosquitoes during very bad season. And, everybody, this is a pretty easy thing to do, and you make friends and sometimes get bitten by mosquitoes. Anyway. Okay. That's it.
Education, largest clam contest in this one.
Oh, largest clam contest. It's not on my list. Isn't that funny?
I don't have them.
The largest clam contest.
Update, or John, was that culture of an update on?
Yeah, there's one on the latest. There's another
Do you have
thing
off?
on agriculture.
Oh, I have it.
Yeah. Large, okay.
So this is Sunset Cove Marina's application to transition part of their marina to an oyster growing operation. I had something to present, but I lost the town guest internet connection. I don't have the password for the regular connection, so I'll have to do that next week. But where it's at now is the DC is issuing permits. There'll be 4 permits from the DC. A lot of the time that's transpired has been taken up by the application going to, when it went to the DC, it first goes to Shell Fisheries. Shell Fisheries consulted with Region 1, which does tidal wetland permits, to see if they felt that they needed to weigh in, and they felt that they did. So that review is complete. The Shell Fisheries review is complete. They'll be the Region 1 will be granting a tidal wetlands permit. And Shell Fisheries, DC Shell Fisheries grants a shellfish bed permit, a marine hatchery permit, and an off-bottom culture permit. The shellfish bed permit is what the DC originally granted for allowing people to grow shellfish. It's kind of a grandfathered permit, which they've kept in place, but it's largely been superseded by the other 2. The reason they're also issuing a marine hatchery permit, shellfish hatchery, or marine hatchery permit, is because a part of the plan calls for flupsies, floating upwelling systems. Those have always been permitted by Shell Fisheries under marine hatchery permit because they've only been used by hatcheries. The first applicant they've had that wants to sort of incorporate it into a grow-out operation.
And we have a couple of Cornells down at Three-Mile Harbor Marina that haven't been deployed, but they were part of Cornell's program.
Right. And John Nicholas at Sunset Cove Marina also sponsored 2 of those flupsies 2-3 years ago as well. It's part of that same program.
A little tight in there.
Yeah.
It's already a marina.
Yeah. It's just for traffic going.
It is tight.
Well, I did look at that, and I have that information on my other presentation, but basically their best water for navigation is about midway between their last piling here and the opposite shore, and it's well off the the edge of these rafts here. There was and it's in our application, there was at least one 36-foot boat in this marina at one point, which extends beyond what these cages are sized for now. The off-bottom culture permit is for the cages. So these will be floating growing systems where water is forced through containers of very small shellfish. These are basically floating rafts with layers of trays in them. There's also, they're also getting permission to hang pearl nets around the perimeter of these trays. So one thing that's also in his application is, and that I've questioned, I spoke to DC about today, and I questioned Sean about it, is retaining 10 slips here to put boats in. These 10 here. And, he's saying that will allow him to retain status as a commercial marina. I'm asking him to give me some documentation about it, how that does that. The discussion with the DEC was basically this area, Sunset Cove in general, is seasonally closed now. And it will, if with the granting of this application, it'll remain a seasonally closed area. That will allow this operation to keep shellfish in it year round. It can only harvest in the open season. If, however, Sunset Cove area becomes closed year round, what that means for a shellfish growing operation is that they can't keep any shellfish under over 1.5 inches. This is mainly for oysters. Any oysters over 1.5 inches, and they have to they have to take those oysters out to a different grow-out location by October 15th. No, October. I think it's October 31st. So there's also, it's on another picture here, but if you're familiar with this area, there's a boat basin at the end of Sunset Cove Marina that is accessible to people in the Folkestone subdivision. And there are some boats in there, but not a lot of boats in there. So in effect, the number of boats in here don't raise the specter of closing this area like a larger marina might.
Right, you usually see marina areas closed,
Right.
the bottom lands to shellfish.
Right. So the number of boats in here doesn't reach that threshold.
What it does is it creates a mixed use now.
That's right.
And to set the direction you want to
go. I asked the DC about that, how they felt about it, how they looked at that, and basically they don't weigh in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Their only concern is what the number of boats in the area will do to the water quality and whether that'll force a closure.
This is the first I'm hearing of the mixed use opportunity.
It's new.
I had hoped it was going to go all shellfish.
Mhm.
It sounds like there's a hedging of the investment.
They want to keep it a marina, but not have it be, it's like,
I think
you
if-
want everything.
not committing.
Yeah.
Well, if the project itself fails, then at least he has his thing. When he's looking at, I
Yeah,
still
but
have
what's
the marina.
stopping him if oyster sale, what's stopping them from just resurrecting it as a marina?
Might be grandfather or something like
If
that.
there's a way to protect his ability to resurrect it.
Right,
personally,
that's what
I'd
he's
rather see
doing.
him be all
All or nothing at
shellfish.
all.
retaining some right to
I looked at
years.
the town code and I didn't see any definition of a commercial marina. There's a definition of a recreational marina, there's a definition of a boatyard. So
Actually, hear from him on that
this
point.
may be considered a recreational marina under the town code. I'm not sure what John is referencing in his
Is
application.
there any grandfathering of the?
Of a marina?
Practice in marina?
No, if he changes the use.
Initially,
But he's
he
got
did.
10 boats there. and
Who
make sure
determines that?
it's in the marina, so there's gotta be
Well, there's
something.
nothing
We need more.
I wouldn't think there's anything stopping the trustees down the road saying, okay, you don't want to do that anymore, then, go back to your marina as it was
But
pre-existing.
can we, well,
It's our land.
What if it's zoned for residential?
It's our land.
My first question when I saw this for the 10 slips was,
Doesn't matter.
how does that impact the actual growth of the oysters? You've got oysters growing right there, but
You
then
got 10 boats.
we have Gann Road and the marina right there too, so that nixed that
I would think
thought.
it's to keep pump out dock.
Yeah.
Right, but that was my first thought, because I've been there several times, and it is a very narrow little, I mean, you can throw a baseball across the
This also
water
came
to
up
the
with
other
the
side of
last
the land.
So,
Right.
well, it actually, it's in this application. I just noticed
Is
it.
this out an application to us?
Yes, and I believe,
Yeah.
everybody got one of these?
A long time ago, yeah, she brought one in, or maybe it was just for the committee,
This is,
Lori McGonigal gave you.
Wait, this is John
No, I know,
Nichols.
but I think he might have just brought it to the committee, it was a way an application.
I don't recall receiving anything.
Just a committee.
Yeah, it went to the 3 Mile Harbor Committee, I think was weighing in on this before. We can move it to the aquaculture.
And it references this situation?
Yeah.
In here?
He put in a proper application and then we tabled it to let the DEC go first.
I understand that. I'm
Yeah.
talking about
Oh.
Yeah, it's in-
retaining
it's in-
10 slots
it's in
and
both
boats.
somewhere.
I just heard about that as well. So I don't know.
I have one in the office file if anyone wants to.
Here it says, Sunset Cove Nursery will operate as a nursery and grow facility year-round. Sunset Cove Marina Facility will reduce the number of boat slips from 22 to under 10. Sunset Cove Marina will cease to operate as a marina for shellfish purposes as defined by the New York DEC, 10 boats or under. That is a designation that 10 boats under, 10 boats or under, 10 boats or over is designated by the National Shellfish Sanitation Program as a marina.
So then you need a 500-foot floor.
There, you need more than what he's got. So he's that's the basis of
That's the
which
basis
he's doing the 10 boats. It's basically oriented towards the DEC's responsibility to carry out the NSSP's guidelines. It goes on to say, cease to operate as a marina of shellfish will cease to operate as a marina for shellfish. When Sunset Cove Marina, which is the boat part, will cease to operate as a marina for shellfish purposes as defined by the DEC, 10 boats or under, but will still be classified as a commercial marina by New York State, Suffolk County, and Town of East Hampton for rental of boat slips. So I don't know what town regulation there is about that. And I don't think the county regulates marinas and the state didn't know anything about. other than what they do for water quality work.
We have this.
Yeah, and if I asked, I did email John and I pointed out that, I asked him to give me more information and documentation on that, these statements.
Even though he's reserving these spots, they have to be actively used. Could he, temporarily use them for growing more shellfish, but reserve them as slips?
Not without an amendment to the application. This is what he's
Okay, so-
asking for.
Right, okay, so that's clearly delineated where the shellfish is going to be.
Yes, it's very,
Very specific.
that's very specific.
All right.
One concern I have had about this from the beginning, it was a concern, a question, is this is a very small creek or cove. And it's, dead-ended. And this is a dense concentration of shellfish that'll be metabolizing 24 hours a day. What happens in, a hot summer night with oxygen depletion, what happens, with the availability of food, again, in a stagnant kind of a situation. I've talked to a couple of, people I know and researchers, Stony Brook and URI. They had kind of different takes on it. One of them felt, well, there might be some consideration with low oxygen readings on some nights. The other one felt, what attitude was, well, there are other operations that are densely packed, and the operation itself would be the first one to be impacted and would have to sort of, ratchet back if something like that happened. I thought that if I have looked into this a little bit, if we do agree to, go along with this, it would be interesting and maybe important to do some analysis of water quality in there. I was wondering, thinking, well, could we mandate him to do it? But then, do you really want, the person who's
Maybe a contribution to the Goldwater water testing program that's managed by the trustees.
Or what I thought was that, Chris deploys some of these continuous monitoring sondes, calls them. They are available, and they do take multiple probes. I thought, temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and chlorophyll A would be the important parameters to look at here. Chlorophyll A would determine if, there's an impact from the feeding shellfish on the localized algae in the area. Dissolved oxygen would give you the read on, what's going on at night. It could be something we do ourselves. It could be something we contract Chris to do.
I don't know why we would incur that expense for a commercial operation, to be honest.
Well, actually, that's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it, I think, is that it's our water.
Yeah.
We want to know what's going on in our water, and we want to control that.
And he should, someone else, the benefactor should be the one providing that information.
Or helping with getting that information,
Or
partnering with us.
It's to his benefit as well, because if he sees the water quality is poor, then he might reconsider his project. It's to his benefit and to ours as well, since he's in our waters. But I think that's a good idea.
Maybe we could invite him in to check in and say hi.
Yeah.
How many slips does he have now, John? Yeah.
What is it?
They were originally 20.
22 to 10. It's good.
No, he's
been gung ho
This
on
is-
this for
2.5, 3 years.
He also has a site out in back.
He
Yeah.
doesn't have a site.
He doesn't, or
He's talked about partnering with people who have sites out in the bay. There's a whole bunch of hoops he has to jump through with the DC and the county to do this. There's a lot of different,
Wheels.
yeah. The DC kind of wants you to have your own site. If you have to move them from this site to another site, they want it to be your site or some. You have to have an interest in that site, a legal interest.
Right.
And just, I'm not sure about, partnering with somebody out in the bay meets that criteria.
Is there any reason why he couldn't get a site?
No, other than he has to go through the process and the lottery and all that stuff.
And he already has this.
But I know he has talked about, talking to people who have leases out there. He could also probably buy their lease.
Right.
Mike Rivers.
All right, thanks for the update, John.
Well, switch gears.
Did we do the largest?
No, large.
No, here we go. Ready? Okay. We don't have all of us here, but I'm going to ask you, since I volunteered, that you weren't here last time. And I asked anybody who wanted to do this job and nobody raised their hand. So I volunteered myself. Well, we get things done. And so I said, okay, I'll do this. What I'm asking for is raise of hands. Who would like to help me with this project?
In general,
The clam contest, yes. Everybody's supposed to partake. But, all right, so here's what I need from everybody.
help with the planning, is that what you're asking?
Yes, I would like a committee. I would like some input from other people, other than myself, Arlene and Allison, who, we jump on board and we get it done. But I would like a committee, which we had for you, Ben.
Well,
Would you like to, Bennett? Okay,
and I'm out of town that weekend, so I'm gonna pull out.
I know.
What's the weekend that was?
It is October 3rd. Exactly. You don't miss the party, but you can be on the planning committee.
I'll get some donations.
Okay, so Ben and I, and hi, Rick. I'm looking right at you. Come on. In the 3.5 years I've been doing this, you have not been on the committee.
Yeah,
Come on. Where's Paul? What?
Paul was here earlier.
He's gonna bring the plan.
Paul, yeah, but he can't be on my committee. I thought you meant Paul, my husband. I was gonna say volunteering him in absentia. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. Okay, so I have 2 of my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Jim said he would.
Oh, that's true. Okay, all right. So I have a nice team. Okay, so what I'm asking each one of the board members is that each one of you please get 3 prizes. It can be gift certificates, it can be toys, it can be puzzles, whatever you think kids would
Whole
enjoy.
board or?
Each person.
Whole board.
Each.
Person.
Listed 3 donations.
Yes.
Each
So
person on the whole board.
Yes, each person on the whole board.
Some great prizes.
We would like, yes, because last year we
What
were
were some
really hard.
examples?
We had fishing poles, we had clam rakes, gift certificates for pizzas.
Adult, there, and we did a basket for the winner, for the adults.
27 prizes.
We can get some wine.
What if we had in the past?
Yeah, we have
What
8 people,
We had
8
nets.
baskets, 9 baskets.
We had a huge amount of baskets last
9
year.
baskets.
And we had wine, we had,
3 prizes per basket.
what?
You asked us to get 3 prizes.
3
That's
prizes.
27.
That's 27 total prizes.
Divided by
Okay,
8
good.
baskets
Divided by
is
9
3.5
baskets,
each.
there's 3 prizes per basket.
Yeah, we get more.
We get more. Every basket last year was packed. And last year, because of the pandemic, we didn't feel that it was right to go and buy and don't ask people to donate. So some people we purchased from which made them very happy because they were really struggling along. And then some were purchased. And so if you are up to
So we did
purchasing,
allocate some funds towards purchasing prizes last year.
yes.
Remember how
So
much it was?
I think it was
$1,000 or
it 5
I don't remember.
or?
We spend like 6,000 every year. I don't know if we're supposed to.
How much have we done? Yes.
I mean, what?
How much have
We have to buy soup.
No, I understand.
We've spent between 4,000 and 6,000
Yeah.
since way back
we-
before we were in it. We spend a lot and
But I
think
did
Lori
try
would
to
say
get-
we have to vote, to a lot of budget. And,
And
you know,
last year we asked for for presents to be, prizes to be purchased because of the pandemic and people were, in need of.
We never spend the budget.
right, that wasn't our biggest expense though, because we used to
Right.
So
spend
you
that
want to
without
pass
it.
the budget now,
Yeah, we have,
6,000?
how much you asking for?
Yeah, budget up to, right? Yeah.
Budget up to, and then we'll be back. No, just kidding. Up to 6,000, is that the number? Yep.
Second.
All right, so I'll make a motion for up to 6,000.
Second.
Okay.
I will keep a very proper accounting for all of you.
So one of the
Second on
things, besides, so the things that we had last year, we had the chowder contest as we always do. We have to get jury members. Paul, I will speak to him tomorrow. I have found a person to do face painting for kids.
He volunteered to make.
He volunteered to make
The
it,
big,
yes.
Clam pot.
Last year, he wanted me to peel the potatoes.
Yes, he volunteered to make
Yes.
the communal chapter.
But we need something from a food certified place, right, to serve all these people.
I don't think Fred Overton.
No, I mean, the swamp, you bought it from the swamp and then last year we got
Okay.
it.
We have our little, we need to deliver the posters around town. We'll have those made up. Clamshell.
Do we have them already, posters?
No, because we just decided a few days ago, October 3rd, which John and Bill both said was the best time because they need to have the right tide to go out and actually do this. And October 3rd is still, we hope, warm at
Yeah.
least. So it'll be nice.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll do what we did the year before last, have the tent set up and so forth, and we'll reach out we'll have a meeting. How's that? Okay? All right, very
Okay,
good.
so where are,
So that's all I need to say right now. October 3rd, largest clam contest, put it on your calendar. I'm speaking to the public.
Judge and Ponds, request from Scott Schreiner of Signs to renew trustee permit GP 4-20 for shoreline restoration with all the same terms and conditions issued to the owners of 24 East End Road.
Yes, Francis, you may recall, we deliberated on this, I think it was back in February. And we did vote to approve a permit, I believe it was a 6-month permit. Because that time the DEC hadn't yet deliberated, they've really been going at a snail's pace apparently with respect to COVID. So the project does afford a 125-foot restoration area, which is going to be a nice buffer as part of the project. And the modification that we voted on in February, actually was a permit issue previously. The modification was to include some wildlife fencing that did go into the pond. That was going to be put in seasonally. So I think from planting time, September, October, through March, early April, in the first year to get it started. And we've seen some good installations of wildlife fencing. We saw one that wasn't so good, but I think we've learned from that. And, so overall, I think it's a pretty reasonable request. I would say at the end of this renewal, if the DEC hasn't approved it by then, we may want to reconsider. But I think it's fair to give them a runway if the DEC comes forward, that they can move forward in the early fall to do this planting and get that buffer in place. I think it's a net win.
And his email states that we still have not received a revised permit from the DEC that includes the wildlife fencing. The DEC does not appear to be opposed to it. However, most of the staff have been working remotely over the past year and their turnaround times are quite long. So he's just waiting it out with them. Which we really don't have any reason to deny it.
Here's the site plan, if anyone wants to take a look.
It's a pretty good project.
I remember this.
I think we beat this one up pretty good.
I'll make a motion. Are you gonna make a motion? And we'll
I'll make a
second.
motion to renew
May I
the
see?
permit.
Thank you.
And, see how the DEC plays out during that time, hopefully they can get started.
Okay. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there an amount of time on that? A year?
Yeah.
For a year. And, I think we would, take a look at the fencing in the spring and make sure that it's been removed according to the guidelines.
Does that include the
I
fragments
remember
of that
this.
too?
We're gonna be cutting fragmites, the hand cut, at least 2 cuts to a low height.
Managed and free
And,
native wetland species.
and they got a good, pretty strong plant list. And I like 125 per copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
That's right.
It doesn't seem to have a house. Do they own this
No, you're
adjacent
building
lot?
the property now.
Yeah.
There's a house there now.
It's being
Oh, the house-
constructed, finishing
oh.
up construction.
This was 2018, so the house is there.
Very large
Was the house
house.
what?
It's a large house. It's actually, they did get a little bit of a variance because the house, tennis court and
Oh,
pool
my.
was proposed.
Quite some house.
So they did get the
Planting, okay.
There's no yard though.
Right now, there was historically sod going down to the pond. So you get the 125 for buffer. That was kind of, I think, the horse trading again.
24 West End.
A little more
24
coverage.
West
of the
End,
structure.
okay.
Here's
It's on the code itself.
Here's an aerial of where the property is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
No,
So it is-
we can all move in.
It's on West End.
This is what it.
No, I canoed down there.
Grass going all the way down.
Oh, wait, is this the Heppenheimer? Former Heppenheimer?
I think.
No, I don't think so.
No?
No, that's across the.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, wrong
That's
one.
across the code.
Yeah.
Part of rock.
Anyone else getting tired?
Yeah, we gotta keep moving.
We have to keep
We just
moving.
voted on this. We just voted on this. Let's move on.
Approve this and
Yeah,
Okay.
we approved it twice.
All right, but I always like to know what I'm talking about, right?
Matthew Blazing Point, request to transfer the lease
Yes.
held by Adam and Amy King, leaseholders of 176 Shore Road, lot number 32N. In Lazy Point 2, Margaret A. Schlitt, Town of East Hampton residents.
We talked about this 2 weeks ago, and we decided that we would table it until the last document came in, which it did. And so we are ready to vote on this, and I'd like to make a motion that we do approve the transfer so they can, from King to Schlitt. And we have the affidavit of publication today that came in from Deborah Corin, from Matthews, Kirst, and Cooley, so we are set to go. So I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah, we're all set with this one.
Okay,
I'd like to make a motion to,
Second.
thank you.
all in favor?
Aye.
Now, maybe I'll just hold off on this. This is late.
Well, I think it's a good one.
Well, you don't know what I'm gonna say.
I've read your mind.
Lazy Point leases, prospective tenant, okay, here it is. Outline posted on the trustee website. So Chris put together basically a synopsis of the rules in order to purchase, correct?
Correct.
And I thought that was very helpful for our public, rather than have everyone call the office. There it is, written by Chris, our attorney, and it gives the, little background history as to what Lazy Point is, which is already on the Lazy Point with the page itself. But this way, lawyers, brokers, people can look to see what is required. And if they have questions, then they go, but at least it gives them a preliminary idea, because we were getting so many calls from all different people asking all sorts of questions. And I just thought this was a nice, concise way of helping the public.
Go to the website. That was good.
Yeah, go to the website. So that came in today, and Michael is posting that. And thank you for changing it to PDF.
No problem. Anytime.
Oh, so I'll make a motion. No, we don't have to make a motion. It's just went up to the website. It was an
That's
announcement.
one on the website.
Whatever happened with the discussion about the amount of time you'd be a resident?
It hasn't gone anywhere yet,
We
but it
didn't,
needs to be addressed.
yes, we started it, but then it just kind of fell by the wayside.
Do we
So
have any rules about anyone owning multiple properties down there?
Yeah, two, I
Oh,
think,
it was
two people.
It used to be two.
You're allowed to own two lots.
Yeah, but I don't know that it's in the rules and regs. I think what we really need to do is, because we didn't do it this year, we need to review the rules and regs every year at the beginning of the year and vote to approve them again, whether or not you make any changes, but we need to remember to do that at the start of the year. So we have several things we want to update this year.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should do it rather than wait for next year. Maybe we should begin the process now. And
Yeah, we should.
we'll get together, Jim, myself, who's the other, Mike. So maybe when Jim comes back, we'll jump on the bandwagon again and start to get this going, because by
We
the
can do
time
it
it's
annually with our
done,
resolution.
yeah, it'll be the next year. All right, see you after you have
And
my.
I've heard from several people down there who are very supportive of the minimum. And it's
Residency.
not a short minimum that they're asking. on
Okay,
residency.
that's good news.
Yeah.
That's good news, because we want to retain the
Mhm.
place and not see it turn over in sales left and right.
So on to administrative payment of bills, East Hampton Marina, $654.93 for gas. Optima, $152.02. Seacoast Enterprises, $149.95 for VHF radio. Norwalk Smith CPA auditor, $8,000.
Thank you.
Motion for bill.
Second,
I want to table the Norwalk.
Yeah, we can talk.
now Rocky is our CPA.
Yeah. Is that, now is this invoice for our personal audit or
Yes.
for the town audit?
I can explain to you afterwards, but basically, we moved our professional fee and the money they were giving us for Naraki, we used it to pay our attorney, and now we're paying this. It was just we'll talk about
That's
it.
gonna need some explaining.
So we
So
are
let's
paying it
table-
ourselves now.
Let's table that one.
Yeah, this is our personal one, not the town one.
So is there a motion?
Yes,
Yeah, I
I'll make
amended
a
it.
motion.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes to approve, June 26th. Anybody have a chance?
I did both of these and edited them and returned them.
I looked at them also. Made some comments. Both these minutes.
I seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Financial report for the month ended July 31st.
Francis, I did have a chance to look over.
Okay.
We did have expenditures for dredging at Fresh Pond, opening the culvert, pump that boat. Legal fees all appear to be in order. We have some lease revenues from Lazy Point. We have transfer revenues. Everything appears to be in order. Pretty healthy statement. I think the motion will accept them.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
And renewal of a certificate of deposit ended in numbers 5679.
second, third.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So who seconded?
I don't
You?
have anything for the clerk, so does anybody have anything?
Motion.
Oh, wait a minute, I do. We got a report from Dr. Gobler that shows a now, normally we would get something from the town health department, which I haven't seen or heard.
He gave us a
Oh,
contact.
interesting, yes.
Yeah, but they usually contact us to say, hey, you have a problem there, you need to shut it down.
Maybe he just sent it today.
It doesn't come from him.
It comes from the county
Comes from the county.
to us.
From his data.
But I think.
It's based on his data. He notifies them and then they send out the notice.
Or maybe it's
Perhaps we
coming.
notify them
And he was
have-
just being
Maybe
preemptive.
we'll see it tomorrow. I don't know, but
Why don't you just ask them why we didn't directly?
I will, but I didn't see it today.
It's possible that he notified them and they didn't.
So he's recommended we post signs We have posted signs in the past.
Yeah, we posted signs.
But he also said it could be the county posted signs.
Yeah.
They have.
They come from natural resources. though.
Yeah.
I think we made our own. I remember seeing some.
Well,
See, now that's another
Yeah,
sign.
it says in the past, Suffolk County
There's, I
posted
think
signs.
there's some in the office, right?
Yeah, we,
Yeah, I'm not sure he's correct.
the trustees and the town have been doing the posting for the county for years.
Yeah.
Since I came on. I guess they don't really want to come out here.
So we can find,
We should.
And Bill Taylor has
we
been
should have
posting
a-
them.
Do we have any signs in the
Sign
office?
being
I have to make them up and
put
laminate
in,
them.
and then
Yeah.
we're doing like
We have the official one.
more or less.
Yeah, that are laminate like this, right?
Signs
I
that.
made
Those.
Yes,
those grabbing
exactly.
signs and put them on those 2x2 oak posts.
Mhm.
Just
Right.
dig them in.
Where did you
take
have them
out
made?
every year.
Staples?
Staples.
Okay, I don't think I saw it, but. Right,
I'm sure you get some office.
I know we put them
No.
on.
It's always the same thing, just.
right. Well, it
Well, you
sounds
can-
very
you said you can
threatening
make some
for
up.
human beings and
We can make them up.
animals and-
Do we have
It
any?
wouldn't
I
hurt
think
to
there
have
should
the
be a
metal ones at some
template
point,
or
but.
a copy.
Yeah,
They go-
well, that takes a while.
Yeah, usually, actually in the past, Bill's put them up, he staples them at the end of each lane there and on the highway, on Hollow Farm Road and the other way, and,
Do we have any of the signs?
Yeah. we should
Well, yeah, there's-
put it in the hall. Air conditioning.
oh, okay, yeah, Yeah.
Actually, there's one in my truck. Right?
the wooden.
Oak State, they're about 6 feet tall.
Oh, nice. I'm gonna bring up a silly sign, just the turtle signs, the green ones. We have been having people, I don't know if you've seen them around town, but they're everywhere. People are coming in and taking the signs. And I have a thought that maybe the next time we make these signs, because they're not inexpensive, that maybe we ask for a simple donation for a sign. Go to the Captain William Rice Scholarship Fund.
I see a lot of those signs like in front of people's houses.
Oh, no, they're all over the road.
Yeah, in front of people's- I know, but it's like, I don't know, it's like they should be where they belong, not like
Well, you're-
advertising
Not a
on
grand
like common environmentalists.
No, I've seen them in various different wetland areas. I've seen them in Northwest Woods, where there are turtles crossing. In fact, Paul, my husband, just saved a turtle on Two Lows of Water Road. He got out and right after he moved it across the road, a truck came. So, you know, I'm happy that people are using the signs. It alerts people to a message.
I think people probably saw it turtle across the street in front of their house. So there's no sign.
Yes.
Well, it goes in, actually, in Clearwater Beach. No, in Clearwater Beach, I had a woman last year. She came and she had a friend and she said, we have turtles that cross our street, so we'd like some signs. I'm just happy that people are being made aware of the,
Yeah, I've had people who are not that in tune with the environment. It's brought awareness to them. Not turtles crossing the street.
there you go. I'm delivering two to Montauk. I should give them to
And I
you.
did stop
They're in
for
my
a car. I saw one at the airport.
Yeah, it goes to Kimberly Espy. It's very.
9:36, anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make the motion. We all make a motion.
Thanks, everybody. Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.